In this world, dungeon clears decide your social status, and he got stuck with the most useless class imaginable. Appraiser. No damage, no glory, just numbers nobody cares about. So he hit record and uploaded dungeon runs online. Views turned into levels, comments into skills, and suddenly the worthless guy started scaling harder than top rankers. What happens when clout becomes power, and an influencer starts clearing dungeons for real? Let's go. One day, a group of adventurers encountered a formidable opponent, and judging by their nervousness, they certainly weren't expecting such a monster. A huge wyvern stood before them, and a girl who had recently met the protagonist, Asura, stepped forward and told him to hide behind her. She would protect him. Noticing her hands shaking, he realized she needed protection herself, and he was simply useless. So he decided to take action. He stepped forward and, in order to somehow be of some use to his team, informed them of the wyvern's skills and how exactly it attacked. The girl looked at him in surprise, and when the wyvern released a fireball, MC told everyone to quickly dodge. Thanks to his class, Appraiser, he sees all the information about monsters. Some time ago, Shu was heading to a dungeon and overheard two adventurers talking on the street. A guy bragged to his friend that the monster he killed dropped some very valuable items. He was so lucky with his class. Looking at them, MC thought for a moment, then took out his phone and checked his bank account. He only had 12,035 yen. This happened about 50 years ago in Tokyo. The capital's residents enjoyed a peaceful life until one day, dungeons appeared. Many huge towers fell directly on the city, destroying residential buildings. From that day on, everything changed. Everyone received a class, and guilds began to appear. One of the artifacts obtained in dungeons were class books. By touching this book, people of a certain class could awaken new abilities within themselves. Naturally, each class had different strengths. With this, they were able to control the dungeons, and Shu possesses a slightly unusual power. When he entered the dungeon, he encountered a huge wood golem, but he did not retreat in the face of danger. When the golem pounced on him, he was nervous but didn't take his eyes off it. He then used the appraise skill and saw all its stats. The wooden golem was a D-rank monster with a weak spot in its head and was vulnerable to fire magic attacks. The lunge skill slammed one of its limbs into the ground. The monster was slow but very strong and had only one skill. MC quickly dodged its strike and drew his sword, thinking that since it was made of wood, he could easily cut it with it. After that, he did just that, chopped off its legs and plunged the blade into its weak spot, the core in its head. As soon as the monster stopped moving, the system informed him that he had gained 30 experience points and leveled up. Realizing what he had just done, Shu let out a sigh of relief and took out his phone to stop recording. Otherwise the battery would quickly die. After checking that he'd captured everything on video, he smiled and thought he was lucky his phone hadn't broken. He didn't want to waste money on something so stupid. Now he decided to check his status window. He was only level 2, with 110 mana and 110 physical strength. His appraisal skill had low offensive potential, and while it was sometimes useless, it was unique. Using this skill on people allowed him to see their stats, but he thought peeking into other people's stat windows without permission was a bit unethical. Hearing a hissing sound behind him, he turned around. The golem's body had begun to disintegrate. The monster had left behind some belongings, or rather splinters. He immediately collected everything and thought that with his skill, he could learn information about people or monsters. However, appraisal papers, which also reveal information about monsters, were often found in dungeons. One such paper can be bought for 1,000 yen. In other words, his services cost no more than 1,000. However, people often don't want someone to look at items dropped by monsters or magical artifacts found, so they prefer to take appraisal paper. He dreamed of becoming an adventurer since childhood, but with such a useless skill, it would be difficult for him to even survive. After collecting all the items, he went to the capital's Adventurers Guild and told the worker that he came about the appraisal. Hearing this, a man asked if he was also an adventurer. His friend told him to ignore him. He just worked there part-time. He heard that his class is Appraiser. He can appraise items or creatures without using appraisal paper. The man exclaimed in surprise, "Is that all? He's useless." His friend told him to be quiet. He could hear them. MC meanwhile smiled irritably. He heard them perfectly well, and one day he would definitely become a first-class adventurer. But for now, he sits here in the guild and appraises items. The guild often has to examine items dropped by monsters, and this is where his power becomes at least a little useful. He charges 700 yen per item, which is 300 yen cheaper than appraisal paper. It's been a month since he became an adventurer, and his main income comes from part-time work at the guild. When he has extra mana, he often helps out the receptionists. When he finished work, they handed him the money for today, and he left to the ridicule of the other adventurers. Leaving the building, he sighed heavily and thought that he received 7,700 yen in 1 hour. Considering that it takes about 10 hours to restore mana, that comes out to 7,700 yen for 11 hours. But he still has no other choice. He got home towards nightfall and immediately sat down at the computer and started working on something else. After that, he took out his phone and decided to upload a video to his channel. The quality, although not very good yet, is good enough for a first try. Now the description. Checking the stats of my slime and killing it. Shu doesn't really think that appraisers can become full-fledged adventurers, so he wants to prepare a safety net in the form of a video hosting channel. Of course, you can find information about monsters on the internet, but has anyone recorded a video with the optimal strategy for killing a monster? After uploading the video to his channel, he turned off the computer and decided to go to bed, but here he is lying in bed and waiting for people's reactions. After all, this is his first video. An hour later, his video only got 5 views, but that was to be expected, since he just created his channel. Hoping that he would have more views tomorrow, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. While he slept, his views grew, and with them his experience. He finally woke up to a level up notification. It was already morning. He opened his eyes and got up, wondering if that was a notification. Of course, at first he thought he was dreaming, but he still decided to check his status window just in case, and what he saw amazed him. His level had actually increased. He was now at level 3. He wondered how this had happened. He had reached level 3 without killing a single monster. Could this be a bug? He turned on his computer to search for anything about it online, but he found nothing. Was he really the first person to stumble upon this bug? He decided to check his video and was very happy. He had gotten over 30 views in one evening. For a first video, that's pretty good, and it gave him the motivation to keep developing his channel. The next day arrived, and he was now level 5. This confused him greatly, and he wondered what was going on. He was already level 5, and he hadn't even done anything. At that moment, he received a notification on his phone. A user had left a comment under his video. He immediately rushed to the computer to check it, and indeed, a user named Lion had written under his video that thanks to him, she was able to defeat her first monster. This comment made him very happy. After all, someone had found use for his assessment skill. After that, he uploaded 7 videos online, and in total, he had over 1,000 views. In his opinion, this was a great start for a beginner. He hoped that there would be people like Lion who would benefit from his videos. And then he finally understood everything. Did he really get experience points for every person who defeated a monster after watching his video? For example, healers get experience for healing the wounds of a comrade who killed a monster. The system takes into account that the monster was killed with the help of this person, so it divides the experience points between the two people. In other words, users watch his videos and kill monsters, and then the system gives him experience for the dead monster. But is this even real? Since nothing else came to mind, he decided to conduct a little experiment and went into a dungeon. There are a huge number of dungeons in the world, and he decided to go to a useless place near his house. Of all the videos, the one where he killed a slime has the most views. Of course, there are many sites that post information about monsters, but they often only post the stats of mid-level monsters. Beginners are more interested in learning about weak monsters. In other words, if he posts videos with monsters about which there is no information online, he can earn a ton of views. He bought a neck-mounted camera specifically for this purpose and went hacking at monsters, adding commentary along the way. Skeletons don't have weapons, but their fingers are sharp enough to disembowel a person, so you have to be careful. Zombies deal powerful blows, but take a long time to swing. Furthermore, their thinking is primitive, making it fairly easy to dodge attacks. Ghosts are only susceptible to magic, so those who can't cast spells should run away immediately. Luckily, they're quite slow, so there's no reason to worry. He uploaded a video to the channel and, with anticipation, thought that his analysis of undead behavior was complete. All that remained was to wait for the results. It worked. He earned a ton of experience points and his level increased to 10. He was overjoyed that his theory was confirmed, and since he learned this from his part-time job at the guild, he started screaming with joy, and the other workers asked him to keep it down. He checked his channel and smiled. People in the comments wrote that thanks to his new camera, the picture became much more pleasing to the eye, which means his 30,000 were not wasted. Noticing visitors in the guild, he quieted down and opened his status window. In addition to leveling up, he gained one skill, inventory. This allows him to store items in a special subspace, which is currently the size of a large cardboard box. Of course, this skill didn't impress him, but it would do for now. He was upset, of course, that his stats were growing very slowly. At this rate, he'd have to level up quite a few times to become a worthy adventurer. Scrolling through the comments under his videos, he noticed a lot of complaints. Viewers found it hard to watch his videos without editing in text. This made him think deeply about it. He could certainly download free video editors, but he still needs to learn editing. He doesn't know any editors, and he has no money to pay anyone. His channel has too few subscribers to monetize. If he gets stronger, he'll be able to find a decent part-time job. He searched online and came across that very ad, just what he needed. After a while, he went to the Lords of Orthrus Guild, and seeing their huge building, he even got a little nervous. A week after responding to the ad, he received a notification addressed to him and the meeting place, the main building of the Lords of Orthrus Guild. The ad spoke of a squire position. In short, he would be a simple porter. Entering the building, he approached the girl at the reception desk and said he came about the part-time job. She immediately showed him where he needed to go, and he thought it looked like the guild was planning a large-scale expedition. Considering they'd hired a level 10 adventurer, he didn't think the expedition would be dangerous. The girl led him to the meeting room, and when he entered, he saw nothing but thugs everywhere, giving him stern looks. This made him feel uneasy, and he decided to greet them as quickly as possible so as not to be considered rude. After that, he excitedly bowed to them and loudly exclaimed that his name was Amasora Shu. He would be their porter for today. The meeting room fell silent for a moment, after which everyone returned to their discussion, ignoring his greeting. This made him feel awkward, and he wondered what he expected. Who would care about a mere porter? But one of them still noticed him. It was the guildmaster of the Lords of Orthrus, Kaizuma Shogo. He approached him and thanked him for coming. He was counting on him. They shook hands, and MC in return thanked him for hiring him, after which the men walked away and waved his hand, saying that the meeting would start soon, so let him take his seat. Shu glanced around the room and thought, so this hall is designed for 30 people? It would be better for him to sit somewhere in the corner. While he was looking for a seat, he accidentally bumped into a girl, causing her to fall. He immediately apologized to her and helped her up, asking if she was hurt. She accepted his help and told him with a smile that everything was fine. She also owed him an apology. Seeing her face, he was slightly surprised. She was a foreigner. He noticed her clothes and thought, does this mean that high school students can become adventurers now? The girl sat next to him and said that she was also hired as a squire. His name is Amasora Shu, right? And her name is Eva Lion. He told her that he remembered her name, after which his gaze suddenly widened. He received his first comment from a person with the nickname Lion. He discarded this thought, deciding that it was a simple coincidence. Who in their right mind would use their real name as a nickname? He asked the girl if she was from around here, right? She confirmed it and said her parents were from Russia and America, but she was born in Japan and raised here. She looked down and asked if he didn't bring a backpack. Then he decided to demonstrate his skill to her. He extended his hand to the side, and a bottle of water magically appeared in his hand. She was very surprised by this, and he told her that it was an inventory. He could hide things in a special space and retrieve them at any time. Thanks to his viewing, he leveled up and raised his inventory to level 3. The space grew in size, and now he could store a whole mountain of things here. Eva said she was so envious of him. She only had combat skills. He smiled awkwardly. He should probably be envious, really, and told her that he didn't actually have a single offensive skill. This might sound unmanly, but could she protect him if anything happened? She laughed lightly and said that everyone should do what they can so he could count on her. He mentally called her cutie, and at that moment, the lights went out, meaning the meeting had begun. The guild leader turned on the screen and said that 3 guilds would be participating in this expedition. He pressed a button on the remote control, and an image of the other expedition members appeared on the screen. He said that they were on a video call. He would now turn on the microphone, so they should refrain from inappropriate conversations. Someone on the screen caught the MC's attention, namely a girl with black hair. He remembered her. She was the guild leader of Fresh Blood Idols, and also an A-rank adventurer, the Bloody Kuromine. Adventurers are divided into several ranks. The Lords of Orthrus guild leader, Kaizuma, is a B-rank guild, and there's another person of the same rank on the screen. As for A rank, there aren't even 10 in Japan. Eva asked, so they'll be going into the dungeon with them? He confirmed it, and thought that low-ranked adventurers are usually used as porters. Such expeditions pay quite well, and apparently they won't encounter any serious dangers. Shogo said that newcomers had joined them today, so he'd tell them about their plan. This expedition will take place in the newly opened Sky Palace, an A-rank dungeon. This news greatly surprised Shu. He thought they'd be going to a low-rank dungeon, but it turned out to be just the opposite. He nervously gritted his teeth and thought, are they joking? The fortress is right next to the gate. His physical strength is too low to go into such dungeons, but he couldn't leave with Kaizuma so confidently encouraging everyone, and so he ended up here, camping near the dungeon entrance. Regardless, this expedition is a reconnaissance mission. A full completion is out of the question, due to a lack of competent adventurers. No guild is capable of clearing an A-rank dungeon alone. Kuromine Shizuka gathered everyone at the entrance and said that before entering the dungeon, she would like to go over the plan again. One of their goals is to establish a transit point inside the dungeon. If that isn't possible, then they need to at least obtain as much information as possible about the monsters. But, of course, the main goal is to fully complete the dungeon, so she wants to ask them to join forces and work as a well-coordinated team. MC glanced at her. It was the leader of the Fresh Blood Idols Guild. The expedition has about 80 participants, most of whom are members of her guild. Judging by their equipment, they are quite experienced adventurers. The black gate near the camp allows travel between Earth and the other world. Apparently, only Kuromian's squad will be going into the dungeon, while the other guilds will be supplying supplies and sending reinforcements. Eva said she couldn't believe she was going to take part in something so grand, and Shu agreed. Meanwhile, Shizuka began announcing the names of the people who would be part of the first squad. The group would also include adventurers from other guilds. MC was no longer listening to her. He thought he had been too scared at first, but it was obvious that low-level porters like him and Eva would never be included in the vanguard. But contrary to all his expectations, Shizuka said their names. They both stared at her in surprise and excitedly asked, is she sure? She told them that there was no room for error. She had made this decision after carefully examining the backgrounds of everyone present. Of course, she would pay them handsomely for their work. Shu excitedly exclaimed that that wasn't the issue at all. Why them? She had seen their levels. They were still beginners. She said that it didn't matter. In dungeons like these, all adventurers below rank C were equal. MC turned to the other adventurers and thought, does anyone mind? Of course, they didn't want to risk their lives in a dungeon of such a high rank either. Shizuka said that of course, they had the right to refuse. She would understand. Shu realized that a turning point in his life had come. He had dreamed of becoming an adventurer since childhood, and perhaps this was his only chance to fight shoulder to shoulder with the strongest adventurer in Japan. That was why he firmly declared his agreement. This made his new friend very worried about him, and he told her with a smile that she didn't have to go inside. He was just a fool who would risk his life over nothing. She glanced at him nervously, then exclaimed that she would also go with them. Hearing their answer, Shizuka headed for the gate, and they entered the Sky Fortress. If the dungeon is left unguarded, monsters will begin to emerge, putting civilians at risk. Over the past 50 years, many people have lost their lives due to such incidents. The monsters that inhabit A-rank dungeons are very powerful, But when fresh blood idols took over, the monsters had no chance of survival. While they were fighting the monsters, Shu and Eva hid behind rocks. He looked out from his hiding place and said with admiration that it was no wonder they were considered the strongest guild in Japan. Eva noticed that he was unusually calm, to which he replied that he was also very worried at first, but it seemed they were moving forward without any problems. At that moment, the guild members finished with the monsters in this room and they moved on. He wondered if they were already on the 6th floor. The further they went into the dungeon, the stronger the enemies became. But maybe they would finish much sooner than expected. At that moment, some kind of liquid monster with a huge eye hung from the ceiling behind him. It pounced on him, but he noticed it too late. Luckily, Eva arrived to his aid in time. She cut the monster down and asked if he was okay. He thanked her for her help, and she said it was good that he was not hurt. He noticed her legs. They were shaking. She herself was very scared. Why did she decide to become an adventurer? The guild members called out to them and said they had stumbled upon a nest of monsters, and if they reached them, they should run without looking back. Seeing a horde of spiders of various sizes ahead, MC became very nervous, and Eva warned him that the monster was heading straight for them. The guild members missed one of the spiders, and it ran this way, so Eva ran towards the monster and told Shu to hide somewhere. She swung her sword, but the spider's limbs turned out to be harder than she imagined, and since the monster was also stronger than her, she couldn't hold on to the weapon and fell. MC immediately rushed to her aid. The girl tried to escape, but the spider spat webs at her, gluing her limbs to the floor. After that, the monster loomed over her menacingly, and she was so scared that she began to cry. Shu knew he had to do something. He used his appraisal skill and learned that this spider had a weak spot. Its abdomen was vulnerable to fire. He looked in his inventory, thinking he should have at least something useful. He finally found it. A gas canister and a lighter, a budget flamethrower for exterminating insects. He immediately ran to the monster and aimed the gas canister at it, but it turned out there was no gas inside, all because he had used it to kill cockroaches the day before. At that moment, the spider pounced on the poor girl. She screamed in fear, and Shu, dropping the lighter and canister, ran to her. He had been assigned the weakest possible class. His abilities would be of no use in clearing the dungeon, and yet he rushed to her aid. Eva froze in surprise and, realizing he was exposing himself to attack, called out to him worriedly. Suddenly, something pierced the spider's abdomen at high speed, and they both turned around. Shizuka came to their aid, using her blood manipulation ability to create bullets, which she then fired at the monster. Shu and Eva watched in amazement as the spider was weakened with each shot, and finally, the monster fell to the ground, and their gazes turned to Shizuka. Her blood, that's why she's nicknamed Bloody Kuromine. After that, they continued on, Shu and Eva trailing behind as always. The girl was still impressed and said that Kuromine was incredible, and he agreed with her. After all, they don't give A ranks to just anyone. Eva felt a little uncomfortable and apologized to him. Because of her, he almost got hurt. He excitedly told her that everything was fine. It was Kuromine who saved them, not him. She said, upset, that she was the one who promised to protect him, and then confidently declared that next time she would definitely protect him. He thought again that she was so sweet, even though she hurt his male pride. The squad members meanwhile entered the battle, and Eva asked why he decided to become an adventurer. He didn't have any offensive skills after all. He hesitated and thought, and immediately began to hear the measured beeping of medical equipment in his head, and the image of a man lying in a hospital bed surfaced. Eva pulled him out of his thoughts, and at that moment, one of the squad members ordered the others to stop, and then another cursed and said that he knew they would soon have to face a B rank. A shudder ran through MC's body. He literally felt the presence of this creature hiding in the darkness. Suddenly, a loud scream was heard, and a huge wyvern ran into the hall and appeared before their eyes, greatly frightening everyone. Shu immediately checked the creature's stats, including its weak point, its belly, and its skills: fireball, wing flapping. The wyvern is immune to fire magic and has no weaknesses. He nervously gritted his teeth and thought the monster had a large mana reserve and immense physical strength, not to mention 2 skills. They had of course assumed a B rank monster would appear, but this wyvern was strong even for that rank. This judgment was based on his appraisal skill, but a monster of a certain rank requires at least 3 adventurers of the same level to attack. Among them are 3 B-rank adventurers, a swordsman, a healer, and 1 support, but their skills leave much to be desired. Fortunately, there is 1 A-rank adventurer among them. If just 1 wyvern attacks them, there shouldn't be any problems. Shizuka stepped forward, telling everyone to back off, and at that moment, a scream rang out behind them. The squad members turned to see another wyvern. MC stared in shock, thinking it couldn't be happening. 2 wyverns? Besides, they were pinned down from both sides. The girl nervously exclaimed that no one said high-ranking monsters would attack them simultaneously, and her comrade asked what else she expected from an A-rank dungeon. Shizuka immediately rushed toward the second wyvern. She ran past Shu and told him she would deal with this monster, and he should buy her some time. This confused him, but the monster didn't even give him time to think and attacked, as Eva had warned him. Thanks to her, he was able to dodge the wyvern's heavy tail in time, and it extended its legs, preparing for another attack. A swordsman named Takayama appeared in front of the porters, imbuing his sword with fire magic and leaping at the wyvern. MC immediately realized it wouldn't work, as the monster was immune to fire. He clenched his teeth in nervousness, thinking that there was no way they could hold out until Kuromine returned. Then, an idea occurred to him. There was actually one way. Eva stood in front of him, preparing to defend him, her hands trembling with fear and her eyes watering. He glanced at the girl and realized he had to do something too. There was no time to hesitate. He stepped forward and shouted that the wyvern had two skills, Fireball and Wing Flap. When using Fireball, the wyvern could fire up to 5 projectiles in a row, and when flapping its wings, it dashed forward, strengthening its body with magic. Wyverns were immune to magic and the fire element, so they needed to use physical attacks. He assumed it was a B-rank monster, they couldn't use items, and almost no one knew the wyvern's stats. However, information provides an advantage that could turn the tide of battle. The only problem is that, on the brink of death, no one would want to trust the words of a mere porter. But contrary to his expectations, Takayama believed him and explained that he couldn't use fire magic, so they had to hold off the wyvern with ice magic and physical attacks until the captain dealt with the second monster. His friend turned to him and exclaimed, "Would he really believe this brat?" He responded by telling him that the guy, unarmed, had tried to protect a girl from a spider. Such a moron wouldn't have the brains to come up with such stats. Shu, meanwhile, stared at them in surprise, unable to believe his eyes. The guy's friend said that since the wyvern was resistant to magic, the ice spell wouldn't do much damage. They needed to somehow reduce the monster's health until the captain returned. After that, Takayama turned to Shu and asked, "Any other information?" He was taken aback by the surprise, and seeing the wyvern gathering mana in its mouth, warned them that it would now breathe fire. The mages immediately raised a wall of ice, protecting themselves from the powerful stream of flame, while MC concentrated. Having reached level 20, he gained the observation skill, which allows him to predict the enemy's next move. He saw the monster's paws move and warned the others that it was about to flap its wings. It would now enchant its scales with magic and dash to the side, most likely breaking the magic shield. Everything happened as he predicted. The vanguard immediately raised their shields to stop the monster, and its head crashed into the thick steel plates, and the spikes on them wounded the monster. Seeing the blood, Shu was glad that they had managed to inflict damage, and he exclaimed that now Kuromine would be able to deal with it. Shizuka confirmed his words and said that she had just freed herself. She stepped forward, standing right in front of the wyvern, and her squad members were overjoyed. The monster roared, and then Shizuka reached out to it and used the blood absorption skill. As soon as she uttered the name of the technique, all the blood left the monster's body and rushed to her. Eventually, the monster's body withered from lack of blood and collapsed to the floor. As soon as the body dissolved, a red crystal appeared in its place, and the system informed everyone in the battle that they had killed the red wyvern and received experience points. MC stared at the red crystal in surprise, and while everyone was praising him, he was probably excited and thinking only about how useful he was. Moreover, his level had increased. Soon they stopped for a rest, and Eva exclaimed with admiration that it was incredible. Being an ordinary porter, he had made a huge contribution to the battle. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly, saying that he had only told them about the monster's abilities, and she delightedly told him not to be so modest. He had really helped them out. After killing the wyvern, he used his appraisal skill on other floors, helping the group deal with the monsters. He didn't fight in the front lines, so he didn't get much experience, and yet he managed to level up a lot. They reached the 15th floor, and this guild is really strong. But after leveling up his skills, he realized that there was no one stronger here than Kuromine. As soon as he thought about her, he heard her voice right next to him. She walked up to him and said with a smile that she did the right thing by taking him with them. His appraisal skill was very useful to them. He said that he thought they invited him because of his gathering skill. She pointed out that this skill is also good, not to mention his third skill. She hopes he will live up to her expectations. After these words, he looked at her in surprise and wondered if she really included him in the first squad, because she knew about his potential benefits. Does that mean Eva also has some kind of trump card? Noticing that Shizuka had started gathering everyone, Eva put on her backpack and stood up, while Shu wondered if she had really chosen the entire party so carefully. After that, they moved on, and when they killed another monster, MC received a lot of experience points. He noticed that he was being given more and more experience. Does this mean that people find his information useful? At that moment, Takayama patted him on the head, saying that he was very good, and his friend asked him to leave his number. He really liked this kind of attention. Every 5 levels, a skill increases, while for every 10 levels, he is given a new ability. It would be nice if the 4th skill helped him fight monsters. They went on, and Eva told him to hide behind her if necessary, and at that moment he flinched, sensing danger. Right behind the column next to the girl, a huge ogre was hiding, holding a stone at the ready. He stared at it in confusion, not understanding where it had come from, and at that very moment, an ogre threw a stone at Eva, and he rushed to her aid. But this ogre had spared no effort. His stamina wouldn't be enough to survive the throw. If the stone hit him, he'd be dead on the spot. Seeing him lunge, Eva was taken aback, so he, in an attempt to soften the blow, extended his hand toward the stone and decided to use his gathering skill. His skill quickly absorbed the stone, but because the impact was so powerful, he was thrown back and hit his back against a column with a crash. Eva didn't even have time to process what was happening. His blood splashed on her face. Hearing the crash, the rest of the squad turned around, only to be attacked by a crowd of ogres, and they decided to regroup. Luckily, Shu was more or less unharmed. He grabbed his injured arm and thought it was close, but it seemed he broke his arm. At that moment, Eva was overcome with rage. She screamed that she would not forgive him for this, after which her sword was engulfed in yellow magic. This was her class skill. After that, she pounced on the ogre and swung her sword, instantly dealing with it, and there was not a drop of fear on her face. Shizuka turned around. MC met her gaze and understood why she chose her. Eva is 17 years old, she is level 16, and her class is Divine Summoner. The Divine Beast has possessed her weapon. That's why she is so strong now. Based on what he saw through evaluation and observation, she still has poor control of her skill. This means she hid her skill because she was afraid of harming others. He was distracted from his thoughts by her voice. She ran up to him and worriedly exclaimed, "What's wrong with his arm? They need to give him first aid." He told her that everything was fine, and at that moment a potion flew at him, which he deftly caught, although he was a little confused. Shizuka told him to drink this. It should cure him completely. He asked confusedly, "Are you sure?" It was a very expensive item. She sat down opposite him and told him to drink it. If he died, they would lose all the items hidden by his skill. This made him feel a little awkward. He tried to uncork the potion with his teeth and thought, does that mean she was worried about the items? Eva wanted to help him, but Shizuka was faster. She opened the potion and said with a smile that she also needed his strength. When he realized that he had been fooled like a child, he felt even more awkward, and she changed the subject, saying that she was sorry, but it looked like their mission would drag on for another day. He asked, so she wanted to set up camp here? The guild members began to gradually gather in a group, and she told Shu that, to be honest, she didn't think they would get this far, and it was entirely due to him. He, confused, said that they managed to cope without him, to which she replied that they definitely wouldn't have been able to do that. Everyone present had already been to the Sky Fortress. Back then their guild suffered huge losses and had to retreat. They didn't do anything to become stronger. In other words, their victory was entirely due to him. She smiled and said that she wanted him to join their guild, so let him think about her offer. Eva was very happy for her friend, and he, looking after the departing Shizuka, thought that he was terribly weak. His stats and skills were simply terrible, and yet he was recognized by one of the strongest adventurers in Japan. He was so happy, he even forgot that it was at moments like these that tragedies happen. After that, they continued exploring the dungeon. Having reached the 25th floor, they came across the gate to the boss room. The party members looked at the huge golden gate and noted that getting there had been no easy task. Every adventurer knows what lies beyond these gates. The dungeon's strongest monster awaits its time. If they kill the boss, they'll only have a short time left to complete the dungeon. The only thing they need to do is activate the self-destruct mechanism hidden there. However, it also happens that dungeons remain in their original locations even after self-destruction. MC glanced at the guild leader and wondered, were they really going to go there? An A-rank dungeon is a veritable mass grave. Not a single adventurer has ever returned alive after facing the boss. Judging by past data, their chances of victory are 0. After weighing all the risks, Shizuka said they were heading back to camp. They would return here as soon as they gathered more people. Her squad members breathed a sigh of relief, and Takayama said that he expected nothing less. They went back, and that guy's friend said that they should give this guy some time to rest. He turned to Shu and asked, will he help them? He agreed with a smile, but suddenly someone's loud voice was heard, who asked, are they leaving already? They immediately turned towards the sound. The voice was coming from the boss's room. Realizing this, the squad members began to get nervous, and Shizuka waved her hand and loudly ordered everyone to prepare for battle. The adventurers immediately drew their weapons and took their positions, and MC thought, why is the monster speaking in the language of people, specifically Japanese? Shizuka stepped forward. She stopped next to the gate and asked, who is he? The boss on the other side of the door asked, what do you think? If she is an adventurer, then let her go in and check for herself. Shu became nervous and thought, what is going on? Is he provoking them? He can't use the appraisal skill on an enemy he can't see. Shizuka told him that she had no desire to enter yet, then returned to the party and waved her hand, indicating that they were leaving. The boss can't escape from his chamber on his own, so they were safe until these doors were opened. But this monster broke all the rules. He said that in that case, he would come out on his own, and Shizuka immediately turned around in surprise. The gates began to open, releasing an ominous cool breeze and energy. After that, a dark elf named Da emerged from the boss's chamber and greeted them with a smile, saying that it was a pleasure to meet them. MC stared at him, not understanding how this was possible, and Shizuka, preparing to attack, asked who he was. He shrugged and said that he didn't know, just don't let them think he was mocking them. He knows little about himself, but he knows one thing for sure. He exists to kill people. As soon as he uttered these words, 2 guys standing next to the guild leader lost their lives without even having time to feel a thing. The rest of the squad watched their heads in shock, and a few seconds later the first screams were heard. Everyone was in a panic. Shizuka, although nervous herself, hastened to calm everyone down and told them not to forget their plan. One of the guys' heads rolled right at Shu's feet. he looked at his face and suddenly felt sick. Everything had been going so smoothly until now, and he completely forgot that death was an everyday occurrence in this place. Just like his parents, the dungeons are a graveyard for people. Suddenly, a loud clang was heard, distracting him from these thoughts. Eva, in fear, dropped her sword and fell. MC immediately braced himself. This wasn't the end. His abilities would come in handy here. Shizuka called out to him nervously, asking what his stats were. Since he didn't answer, she called out even louder, and Eva extended a hand trembling with fear and told him to hide behind it. Shu fell to his knees in horror, seeing the stats of this dark elf, and he was very strong. A rank, AA rank magic, B rank strength, and 4 witchcraft-related skills. The dark elf smiled, suggesting they try to defeat him. And MC thought, is this a joke? How can they defeat this monster? To kill an A rank monster, they need 3 adventurers of the same level. The only one who can compete with this monster is Kuromin. Their chances are practically 0. He saw magic circles around the dark elf, warning everyone of the danger, casting a spell. Immediately after that, Da swung his hand sharply, shooting a powerful stream of energy at them, which broke the floor and threw the adventurers. Luckily, everyone survived thanks to Shu's warning. He thought that he was terribly strong, and when he looked up, he saw the dark elf right in front of him, and he asked with a gloomy expression, how did he know that? After all, he used an invisible magic circle. Apparently, he has excellent eyes. He suddenly opened his eyes, they sparkled yellow, and MC realized that he was not their opponent. He called out to Kuromin and exclaimed that they needed to retreat. He was too strong. At this time, she grabbed her head and looked at the boss, and he, casting another spell, said that it was so rude, they had only just begun. Immediately after this, stone walls appeared further down the corridor, so he blocked their passage. Now they could not leave. One of the adventurers tried to break through the stone wall with a spear, but instead broke his weapon. Da said they couldn't break through the barrier. The difference in magical power was too great, although there was still someone capable of it. 1 or maybe 2 people. He glanced at Shizuka, Eva, and Shu, noticing this, thought that Eva couldn't control her power, so she was immediately out of the question. He turned to the guildmaster and said that they would buy her some time, and she should destroy this rock. She frowned and thought that he was right. This was the only option, and yet she couldn't take her eyes off this monster. Then 2 swordsmen stepped forward and told her to go. They weren't considered some of the best adventurers in the country for nothing. After a bit of thought, she ran to the barrier, leaving it to them, and the dark elf asked, are they done chatting? Seeing the blazing energy on his hand, MC exclaimed that he was using a mid-level water spell. They had 3 seconds. One of the mages grew a wooden shield in front of them, which protected them from a powerful attack, and Da asked if he could stop bothering him already. This was incredibly annoying. Then he would get rid of him first. He used a new spell, summoning beasts, and several carnivorous dragonflies emerged from the water. They flew towards Shu, and he became nervous because they were too fast, but Eva came to his aid and easily repelled the attack. She was glad that she had succeeded, and the dark elf noted that he had a good bodyguard, which irritated him. This time he used a mid-level fire spell, which Shu had warned the others about, but the dark elf slightly deceived him. He was close, but he guessed wrong. A stream of flame hit the newly erected barrier, followed by a wind. Seeing this, MC immediately rushed to the mages and told them to run. Another spell was flying there. Realizing what might happen next, he closed his eyes and thought he was mistaken. A water shield wouldn't be able to block such a powerful wind. But the swordsman intervened, using the unrivaled armor skill, and the elf's spells hit him directly. The swordsman deflected his attack with an iron shield. Takayama told Shu that he needed more faith in his comrades, and he thought of unrivaled armor, a skill that requires 2 knights to use. This skill strengthens the adventurers' bodies and creates a shield that blocks any damage. The 2 knights glanced at each other, rejoicing in their small victory. But suddenly MC noticed something and called out to Takayama. He turned to check, and a moment later, he lost his head. His friends stared at his body in surprise and didn't notice how the spell had wounded him as well. Looking through the huge bloody hole, the squad members were horrified. Shu backed away and asked in a trembling voice, how could this be? He felt nothing. The dark elf spread his arms wide and said it was a technique that allowed him to cast a spell prematurely, leaving no magical trace. He could see his mana, right? But right now, he was completely powerless against it. And then MC realized he was the weakest adventurer, the Appraiser. Until now, he had always been lucky, so he had become arrogant, and this is what it led to, the deaths of his comrades. At that moment, the system notified him of experience gain, and he wondered if someone was defeating monsters right now using his videos, but he had no time for that. But this someone had really helped him. Thanks to the new experience points, his level increased and a new skill was unlocked. At that moment, Shizuka finished the barrier, turned to the squad, and informed them that the way was clear. Now she would hold him off, and they should run as quickly as possible. She ran towards the dark elf, using blood magic along the way, and the adventurers rushed towards the hole in the barrier, and the dark elf irritably said that they couldn't escape. He created another stone barrier, blocking their path, and told Shizuka that it would be a nuisance if she made another hole, so he would concentrate on her. Realizing that she could no longer help them, Eva fell to her knees in exhaustion, while Shu, meanwhile, carefully read the description of his new skill. After that, he called out to Eva and extended his hand, smiling, telling her to stand up. He wanted her to summon the divine beast. She looked at him in surprise and exclaimed that it was useless. She couldn't control it. If the beast got out of control, they would all die. MC thought that this was true. At her current level, she was incapable of giving orders to the divine beast. But he had an idea. He assured her that everything would be fine, she just needed to trust him. She stared at him in confusion, unsure whether to take such a risk, and at that moment, screams were heard from the squad members, some of them caught in the dark elf's attack. Shielding herself from the blows, Shizuka ordered them all to retreat to the wall, and Shu immediately headed towards her, thinking that he had to help her. At that very moment, Eva summoned the divine beast, Orochi, and when he turned around, he saw a huge, snow-white serpent. Eva clenched her fists and confidently declared that she too was an adventurer, then extended her hand to Shu and exclaimed that she believed in him. They joined hands and MC called out to the squad captain, saying that they would take on the Dark Elf, and she should break the wall. The Dark Elf looked up, assessing the beast's size, and Shizuka, running past them, asked, "Is this the divine beast?" Shu, meanwhile, told the girl that he would take control of Orochi, but that she should also try not to lose concentration. She agreed, slightly excited, after which he used his new skill, mimicry. This skill allows one to temporarily copy the ability of a person on whom he used the assessment. Together, they would definitely be able to control Orochi. The serpent began to rage, trying to escape control, and when they both ordered it to heed their orders, it calmed down and bowed its head before them. Seeing this, Eva was very happy. They had succeeded. MC told her to give the order, and she told Orochi to kill the Dark Elf, after which he immediately pounced on him, but he responded by casting a stone bullet spell at the serpent. Orochi suddenly froze in place and reflected the spell, which slightly surprised the Dark Elf, after which the serpent attacked him, and he jumped aside. Shu thought that mana was much weaker than Orochi's divine energy, so the Dark Elf didn't stand a chance. He called out to the squad captain and told her to hurry, and then the Dark Elf prepared the spell again, saying that he would not let them escape. Eva immediately ordered Orochi to prevent him from using magic, and he attacked. The elf's magic circle shattered, and he realized he couldn't get through, finally opening a hole in the stone barrier. Shizuka informed Shu that they were finished, and he, smiling, glanced at Eva and told her they were leaving. They successfully escaped, and Da scratched his head in confusion as he watched them go, after which the serpent attacked him, and he jumped aside. He looked at it, wondering what he should do with it now, and at that moment, a second Dark Elf, appeared. She dealt the Orochi such a powerful blow to the head that its body was split in a precise cut. Afterwards, she glanced at Da with displeasure and noted that as soon as she closed her eyes for a moment, he had engaged in a battle he nearly lost. He cheerfully noted that the serpent was vulnerable to physical attacks, and she, sighing heavily, suggested that they return to the hall. The two of them went to the boss's room, and Da wondered if that guy would come again. Time passed, and after that, the MC sat in his house. Lying on his bed, he looked at his bank account. He now had 1 million yen. Initially, he was supposed to receive only 150,000 yen, but then the bid was raised to 500,000. So in 2 days, he earned 1 million yen. He looked up at the ceiling and wondered if that was a fair price. During the expedition to the Sky Fortress, several veteran adventurers died. They were unable to retrieve the bodies, and funerals with empty coffins felt really bad. While Shu stood at the funeral, he swore that he would definitely return to the Sky Fortress and finish off that elf with his own hands. He also posted a video of himself, which went viral and quickly gained 1 million views. In the Sky Fortress, they encountered 57 types of monsters, meaning he was able to upload a total of 57 videos to his channel. Thanks to the video with the elf, he finally achieved monetization. He used the money he earned to commission 20 videos to be edited by professionals at 50,000 yen each. This resulted in a sharp increase in his channel's subscriber base. In other words, the more people who killed monsters after watching his videos, the more experience he gained. He reached level 77, and his magic and physical strength were equal at 860. Looking at his stats, he was overjoyed. Having reached this level, he began spending several days leveling up. His appraisal skill began to show him much more information. His inventory became as large as a gym, and his clairvoyance allowed him to assess the boss even before entering the dungeon. In short, he acquired many useful skills. After some time, he decided to venture into a B-rank dungeon in Shinjuku, which had long been cleared by others. On the 30th floor, there are rats, on the 60th, minotaurs, and on the 90th, ferocious birds. The higher the floor, the stronger the enemies, and he came here for only one reason, to summon a spirit using his new skill. Entering the dungeon, he walked into a spacious hall and took a deep breath, then loudly commanded the spirit Xenochorus to appear. Immediately after, a cloud of smoke flared near his hand, revealing black tufts of fur and gray skin. Xenochorus answered the call, and, looking at its master, it smiled and thanked him for his cooperation. Xenochorus is not a divine beast, but it is nevertheless very powerful. The only problem is that it does not work for free. The spirit began flying around Shu, showering him with compliments, and at the same time, it inquired how much they would be working today. He told him that they would be here for 8 hours, and then he hugged him tightly, exclaiming that then he would owe 80,000 yen. That is exactly the problem. He does not take mana for his work, but money. He follows all his orders as long as he pays him. He said that he would fight the new mobs and let him deal with the rest. Xenochorus happily wagged his tail and said that if he paid him 5,000 yen an hour, he would fight much better. He answered him that it was too expensive, and he, clicking his tongue in displeasure, went to work. A squad of lizardmen emerged from the darkness, and Xenochorus told his master that now he would show him how strong a rank A spirit is. MC smiled, He had no doubt about it. After that, part of the spirit's body turned into energy shaped like hands. He directed streams of energy straight at the monsters, grabbed them, and began to tear them with sharp claws. After a few seconds, only items and 45,000 experience points remained. Shu thought that Xenosaurus was of the same rank as that dark elf. Thanks to his channel, he was able to earn money, become stronger, and complete dungeons. An image of that woman popped into his head. Besides all this, he could help her too. He was distracted from his thoughts by the sound of notifications. Eva had written him a message. So that channel really belongs to him? To be honest, she watched his videos even before he became popular. It was thanks to him that she was able to defeat her first slime. She is so grateful to him. He once again thought that she was so cute, and Xenosaurus, smiling, nudged him in the shoulder asking, "Is this a girl?" He is so jealous of him, but he advises him to spend money on him, and not on his girlfriend. He answered him that she is not his girlfriend. Besides, he already spends all his money on him. The spirit said he knew. No one asked him, but he was a hopeless businessman. He understood everything himself. MC responded with a smile, saying that he knew. No one asked him, but he was terribly weak. That's why he needed his strength. Xenosaurus looked at him thoughtfully, then told him not to think that he would give him a discount because of some sentimentality. At that moment, he received a new notification and thoughtfully read the message. The spirit asked, "Is it a girl again?" He answered that it was his editor, and he wrote to him with an offer to sign an exclusive contract. He was also an adventurer. Time passed, they both emerged from the dungeon, and Shu stretched, saying that clearing 60 floors was very tiring. He had to come here for 3 days straight. Xenosaurus was only happy since these expeditions bring him so much money. After checking the time, he realized the workday was over and hurried to leave. He looked at him in shock, wondering if he'd already managed to buy himself a smartwatch. Xenosaurus quickly said goodbye, saying he'd look forward to the next summoning. MC then took the camera off his neck and thought he'd shot about 100 videos. Now he needed to send his partner a dozen for editing. It was time to think about the contract. After that, he headed to the Fresh Blood Idols Guild with Eva to meet Shizuka. When she invited the girl to the guild, she was very surprised because she didn't yet know how to control her divine beast. Then Shu helped her. Shizuka looked at him and said that in that case, he just needed to accept the invitation. With his appraisal skill, adventurers can fight at full strength, and everyone hopes he will join the guild. He looked at her slightly embarrassed, and she said she wasn't rushing him. He could think about his answer, but she would wait for good news. After that, she left, leaving them, and Eva asked what he thought about it. It was an invitation from one of the best guilds in the world. They had no reason to refuse, right? MC looked down thoughtfully and agreed with her, after which they parted ways. Eva was right. Everyone dreams of joining Fresh Blood Idols, but right now, he had no time for that. Besides meeting with Kuromin, he decided to talk to the editor. He was curious about the exclusive contract he wanted to offer him. He took a table in the cafe and waited for him, when suddenly a man's voice came from behind him, apologizing for the wait. He replied with a smile that he had arrived earlier than the appointed time. This man's name was Saito Shinji. He thanked Shu for always turning to him for editing. After sitting down at the table, he thought he was so polite. He looked to be about 25. When the waiter brought his coffee, the MC suggested he get straight to the point, but he hesitated. After taking a sip of coffee, he suddenly jumped up from his seat and shouted that he was simply incredible. Every day, a huge number of people view his videos. He is the most popular adventurer on this video platform. He is amazed at how quickly he generates decent content. Realizing that he was being too loud, he immediately apologized to him. In short, Shu is desperately short of video editors. He's filmed well over 10 today. So the best solution would be to start his own guild and assemble a team of editors. He'll also need a corporate lawyer to help him with the legal side of things. Until recently, he was a scoundrel, so he hadn't considered such options. He honestly admitted to the editor that he'd been invited to Fresh Blood Idols, and he exclaimed in surprise, "Is that true? Did he accept their offer?" He replied that he was still thinking about it, and then the man jumped up from his seat again and recommended that he create his own guild. That way, he could maximize his potential. MC stared at him in surprise, not understanding what potential he was talking about, and he said with a smile that he'd once been in an adventurer's guild too. But his class was so weak that he decided to leave. He didn't know if that was the issue, but he couldn't think straight even in the weakest dungeons. Often, people with similar classes can't even level up, and his videos help beginners with combat classes level up. He's their hope. He was so overjoyed that he raised his voice, and then a waitress approached them, saying he was disturbing other customers. He immediately apologized to her, then pulled himself together and returned to his seat, saying that's why he wants them to sign an exclusive contract. He'd given up on his dream, but he didn't want others to suffer the same fate. He's ready to do anything to help, so let him give up joining other guilds and create his own. Shu didn't let him finish and said with a smile that he agreed. He would sign an exclusive contract with him. Shinji expected him to refuse, and so he asked in surprise, is he serious? But he had been invited to such a large guild. He said that he was actually very happy, which surprised the man. Kuromin and Eva acknowledged him, but only as someone who was useful in the presence of adventurers with combat classes, while Shinji said that his skills were useful in themselves, and that's why he made this choice. He would create his own guild. First of all, to create a guild, you need a lawyer. On average, this costs 50,000 yen per month. If he has extra funds, he advises hiring another one. He also recommends finding a specialist familiar with the activities of video bloggers. Shu glanced at his phone screen and pressed a button. He would probably have to contact a large firm, so he contacted an agency ranked among the top 2 law firms in Tokyo. Representatives of the law firm, Kitakabe and Sakura, appeared before him. They introduced themselves to the protagonist, and he reflected on the shame of not having a business card yet. They asked him to come to the next office. Shu told them about his channel, where he posts videos evaluating monsters. Last month, advertising costs had exceeded 10 million yen, so they suggested he get to know his company. He also told them about his campaigns and other financial matters. Kitakabe stood up and, with a smile on his face, said that in that case, he should let him offer his services to Sakura. She would explain the contract terms in more detail, and then he would be able to decide for sure. He was counting on her. Sakura replied, "Yes, manager." She was getting a bit ahead of herself, but he should let her brief him as his personal lawyer. After some time, they discussed all the important and key points and concluded. If he considered her suitable as his corporate lawyer, he could sign the contract. The protagonist reflected on the fact that, frankly, he had little understanding of the law, and therefore didn't know whether he was being deceived or not. But Sakura not only listened attentively to him, but also clearly explained all the unclear points, and then he realized he had come to the right place. He confidently rose from his seat and, turning to Sakura, announced that he agreed to sign the contract. Sakura clarified that she was sure he was satisfied with her. He bowed and replied that he was counting on her. Sakura's mouth dropped open in surprise, and after a brief silence, she smiled and replied, "Okay." She hopes for a fruitful collaboration. Starting your own company involves issuing shares which initially belonged to the CEO. In other words, all the shares will be his, right? Shu replied that he'd like to give some of the shares to the person editing his videos. After all, it was his idea to start the company. Sakura folded her arms and replied that she understood everything. Then could he please transfer 5, or more precisely 30% of the shares to them? What could he say about that? The protagonist asked in surprise. Is that really necessary in this situation? Sakura replied that he would own half of the company's shares, so if he gave them 30%, nothing bad would happen. He replied, "I see." Sometime later, the day was drawing to a close. When Sakura arrived at her director's office, he asked how everything went. Sakura replied that he had little understanding of the law and was overly honest. By introducing him to the right people, they could buy out half of his company's shares. Kitakabe clapped his hands and shouted, "This is great. Everything is going very well." Then he patted Sakura on the shoulder and told her terrifyingly that until now she had only gotten in his way. But if she could handle this, he would forgive her for all her past mistakes. Sakura was dumbfounded with fear, and sweat began to pour down her face. She replied that she understood everything. After that, she sadly left the office and went to the women's restroom. When she locked herself in the stall, she hugged her knees and wondered what she should do next. She always did nothing but listen to her superior's orders, but she still hadn't closed even one successful contract. If she failed now, she would definitely be fired. With these thoughts in her head, she left the stall and looked in the mirror. Pointing at herself, she said that her face was terrible. Her mother named her Sakura because she wanted her smile to be like a flower. It's a very good name. She's always been proud of it. Meanwhile, Kitakabe rose from his desk and looked out the window while talking on the phone with his director. Lately, there have been more and more adventurers in Japan, but they still haven't been able to secure a single deal with the major Japanese guilds. Their plan is to found many subordinate guilds and become a driving force in the adventurer market. Let him not let them down. Kitakabe replied that she shouldn't worry. Today they had been approached by a very ambitious guy who wanted to found his own guild and would make him their puppet no matter what. He spoke these words with an incredibly malicious smile. Sometime later, Shu met with Sakura again and asked her a question. She wanted him to sell 30% of the remaining shares, but then he wouldn't have half. Sakura threw up her hands and replied that it would be better to divide the responsibilities of managing the guild between several people. She could introduce him to someone with extensive management experience. Shu said he'd probably decline the offer. Sakura was deeply upset and hung her head. Shu silently put the cup down, then smiled and said he wanted to give her the 30%. Sakura was stunned and asked in a trembling voice, "Her?" But they barely knew each other. Shu smiled and replied that he was used to trusting his intuition. Sakura was surprised by the offer. He was a seeker with a special skill for evaluation, and when Shu reviewed all the case materials, he didn't understand anything, but right now he wants to start his own company, only to become the next victim of deception. There's definitely something wrong with him. Giving 30% of the shares to a stranger is simply insane. The safest thing would be to keep all the rights to the company for himself. And why is he so trusting someone he just met? All he has to do is sign, and the contract is signed. She and his editor own 60% of the shares. In other words, if they teamed up, they could run the company. She washed herself in the sink, looked at her wet face, and realized she now needed to set the agenda for Shinji. After some time, the protagonist met his editor in the lawyer's building and asked in surprise what he was doing there. He waved and informed him that Sakura had said he needed to sign the contract. The protagonist was surprised and wondered if he had given her Shinji's contact information. Kitakabe greeted him with a smile, apologized for the wait, and now asked him to come in. Shu entered the office with Shinji, and they sat across from each other at the table. He hadn't expected Kitakabe to come too. Kitakabe suggested they move directly to the contract. After that, they would become the heads of the company's ownership. From now on, Sakura would be their corporate lawyer, but when he turned to her and asked where the contract was, Sakura confidently replied that she refused to draw it up. An awkward silence fell in the office. and Kitakabe asked her, frightened. She'd apologized to her manager and written a letter resigning from the company. He stood up and shouted, "What is she doing?" Sakura immediately bowed and apologized to Mr. Shu, saying she'd been deceiving him all this time. The manager had ordered her to take control of his company so she could deceive him. The protagonist was surprised by her reaction and replied in a completely calm tone that he'd already figured it out himself. She asked him again what he just said. The protagonist replied that his appraisal skill allows him to determine the value of things. At level 10, it evolved and can now determine people's worldviews. In other words, he can now discern whether a person has ulterior motives. Those who wish to harm him are surrounded by a dark aura, while honest people are surrounded by a bright one. From their first meeting, he knew Kitakabe was a scoundrel, which is why his aura is incredibly dark. While her aura was pure and bright, he realized Kitakabe was up to no good, which is why he decided to confide in her. At that moment, Sakura burst into tears from the emotional pressure she was experiencing, and Kitakabe abruptly yelled at them to get out of there. Pointing a finger at Sakura, he shouted, "Does she even know how many times he's turned a blind eye to her mistakes? If she wants to quit, he'll make her pay for all the damages." At that moment, Shu raised his hand and said he'd pay for her. An awkward silence fell again in the office, and Shu said that Sakura was now his corporate lawyer, and this could be considered a prepayment for her services. He greatly valued reliable people, and working with someone outside the company would be even better. Sakura was dumbfounded by this and, in a trembling voice, said that she couldn't be his lawyer. The protagonist screamed, "What? Why?" Sakura replied that she tried to deceive him on the manager's orders. Shu asked again, "But she didn't do that, did she?" Shinji turned to Shu, grabbed his shoulder, and said, "That's the kind of client they have." He turned down an invitation from the Bloody Idols because he believed in his dream. Anyway, Sakura, would she be interested in becoming his corporate lawyer? The protagonist extended his hand again, and she, with tears in her eyes and complete joy, replied that she agreed and shook his hand. Kitakabe angrily yelled at them to stop wagging their tongues. Had she really forgotten who he was? Let her be sure he'll make sure no firm will look at her again. He was shaking with rage and suddenly heard his recorded voice, talking to his superiors and telling them he would make this guy his puppet, no matter what. It was Sakura who turned on the recorder and this recording. He tried to harm clients for personal reasons, and that was a crime. Moreover, he'd taken advantage of his position by inviting her to a hotel several times, which was harassment. Did he have anything to say in response? Kitakabe became even more angry, but couldn't answer anything, and the guys, leaving the office, said that in this case they would have to say goodbye to him. As they walked out into the city, Shinji said it wasn't every day he encountered a situation like this. Shu confirmed his words with his proverb, and Sakura, who turned sharply to him and shouted his name, said that as a thank you and an apology, she would give 100% to help him. She was confident his guild would definitely succeed. The protagonist noted that she had a lot of energy. First, they needed to rent an office for the guild. He would compile a selection of the best suggestions, and in the meantime, he suggested choosing a name. Shinji asked again, do they need a name? In that case, they should choose wisely. Sakura suggested they compile a list of all the suitable options, and then choose the best one. At that moment, Shu raised his hand and apologized, his voice shaking as he announced that he'd already thought of a name. The guys exchanged glances and asked him, "Really? Then, what kind of name was that?" After a while, a sign reading, "Art Analysis," hung on the wall. The protagonist looked at it with admiration, and realized that he really had founded his own guild. It was his own guild, after all. Shinji entered his office and asked, "Director, is he looking at the sign again?" He looked surprised and said he was simply very happy about it. They rented one floor of a high-rise and converted it into an office. So far, their staff consists of only 5 editors, but they are actively searching for adventurers. Shinji became the head of the editing team, while Sakura handled all the paperwork, and he, as the guild leader, recorded new videos of dungeon walkthroughs. When he arrived at the new dungeon, he used his Zaniculus power and sent the magical ball toward the wall. Suddenly, Zaniculus cried out in joy, saying he hadn't seen his master in a while. How many hours would they work today? 10 or maybe 20 would be enough. Shu replied that he'd said he had a powered-up version, so how much would it cost him to accept it? He replied that if he wanted it at full strength, they'd need 1,000,000 yen. The protagonist asked in surprise, how much? But to defeat the Dark Elf, he needed to use everything he had, and he couldn't defeat him if he wasn't fighting at full strength, so he needed to know what Zaniculus was capable of. He replied, okay, he'll pay him the 1,000,000, but he needs to show him what he's capable of. Zaniculus shouted, was he seriously agreeing to this? Shu replied that he'd had some extra money lately, so everything would be fine. And besides, he'd already told him he trusted him. Zaniculus was dumbfounded by this, and, a little upset, said that this was the first time he'd met someone like him. Everyone was complaining about how expensive it was, and all that. He patted the protagonist on the back as a sign of friendship, but he was still very glad that he trusted him. Zaniculus used his powers and shouted that he would now show him the true power of an A-rank spirit. Let him watch, and not regret it later. The protagonist covered his face with his hands because of the strong wind, but he noticed what was happening and looked ahead questioningly. Right before his face, Zaniculus began to transform into a different creature. Now he looked like a vampire with sharp fangs and a confident gaze. Shu was dumbfounded and, his mouth open in surprise, asked, who is this? Zaniculus asked him a question. Was he surprised? His manner of speech had also changed. What kind of transformation was this? And what is he now? Really a vampire? He replied that a god had cursed him long ago, turning him into a role-playing animal. But in reality, He was not a vampire, but an angel. But he supposed he was now a fallen angel, as enormous wings had appeared on his back. Shu examined him from every angle, thinking he looked incredibly cool. Zaniculus asked again, what happened? He turned completely pale. Shu shouted that he was getting too close. Okay, so his enhanced form doesn't end with a pretty face, right? Zaniculus confidently replied that of course it did. As thanks for allowing him to assume his old form, he would show him his true power. With these words, Zaniculus raised his hand and channeled all his magical power, chanting spells, power over darkness, the hidden power that governs the world, the power to alter reality with one's own hands, search, teleport, a dimensional blade. A moment later, the protagonist stood dumbfounded as he watched what was happening and screamed, "What's going on?" Zaniculus vanished, and Shu screamed, "Don't leave him alone." The system reported his level had increased, and Shu looked at it and wondered what was going on. He was level 85, so leveling up required a lot of experience, and now he'd leveled up 3 at once. Zaniculus returned to him and reported that he'd destroyed every single monster, from this floor up to the 5th. Shu asked, is that really true? But how did he do it? Zaniculus replied that searching allowed him to locate all the monsters, teleport helped him reach them, and the dimensional blade dealt a ton of damage. There were other adventurers in this dungeon, but he shouldn't worry. He hadn't hit any of them. Shu clutched his head and, looking down, turned to Zaniculus and explained that killing monsters that other adventurers had fought was against the rules. Besides, that way he wouldn't be able to collect loot from the monsters he killed or make videos, which would earn him money. Zaniculus was stunned by what he heard, and the protagonist tried to speak in a trembling voice. Suddenly, he noticed that even his personality had changed. Basically, he should just be more careful next time, okay? He was really cool. Whatever the case, he knew one thing for sure. Zaniculus was a pretty strong ally and very easygoing. Zaniculus put an arm around his shoulders and asked, what are they going to do now? After a while, Eva started shouting loudly, why didn't he tell me he founded his own guild? The protagonist looked at her questioningly, then announced that he was going to make it official, like now. Eva screamed that it was too late. Suddenly, Shinji burst into his office and shouted, Headmaster, the Guildmaster and the Blood Idols, Kuromine Shizuka, have come to see him. Shu turned to Shizuka and happily remarked that they hadn't seen each other in a while. She looked around and commented that it wasn't a bad guild. Everyone was working hard to tell the world about his talent. Shu asked if she really thought so. She replied that more often than not, strong adventurers from large guilds started acting alone, and the same misfortune had befallen her. However, if he continued to pursue his goal, his guild would have many more adventurers than hers. Eva's face darkened at this point, and clenching her fist, she turned to Shu, shouting for him to let her join his guild. Please, let him let her, since she'd leveled up and learned to control a divine beast, he asked. But hadn't Shizuka invited her? Shizuka replied that she had declined. Shu asked, Eva, are you sure this is okay with her? She possessed one of the strongest combat classes, and he was sure she'd be welcomed into any guild with open arms. Eva told him that when she first summoned the divine beast, her power went out of control and her mother was seriously injured. He was dumbfounded by this, and Eva continued saying that her mother had never blamed her for it, but she didn't want anyone else to suffer because of her powers again, and that's why she became a seeker. At first, she was terrified, but after stumbling upon his video, she gradually began to level up. During the experiment, she was able to control the divine beast, all thanks to him. So now it was her turn to help him. He could count on her. She delivered this speech in a burst of emotion, after which she apologized for rambling. Summoning a divine beast is an extremely powerful skill, and only a select few can use it. He didn't need to test Eva with the skill. He could already see that she was a good person. He offered her his hand and said that in that case, he asked for her love and favor in their group. She reciprocated and shook his hand. Thus, their guild gained one more member, and their skill in analysis was gradually improving. New events had occurred today. The protagonist, sitting in his office, wondered if this room was too big for him alone. Sakura turned around and said with a smile that an office should be appropriate for his status. Shu replied that he was constantly running through dungeons, recording videos, and was almost never in this room. She agreed and asked if he could stay in the office today. Shu asked her again, why would that be necessary? She replied that 2 candidates for the guild were expected to arrive today. He stared ahead, stunned, and realized what it meant. First Eva had joined them, and now 2 more. Sakura replied that she had already conducted the interview, but the final decision was his. Someone knocked on the door, and Sakura said it was probably them. At that moment, 2 candidates indeed entered their office. Kuromochi Akito, a fire swordsman, and Hamamura Yachiro, a healer. Shu wondered if they were 18 years old. Had she deliberately chosen younger people? He was pleased to meet them. He was the leader of the Asura guild. Akito suddenly shouted, so he's the leader? He was very happy to meet them. He'd seen their video, so he decided to join this guild. Their quality was simply top-notch. He'd been incredibly helpful. Yachiro also said she was pleased to meet him, and if it weren't for his video, she never would have decided to become a seeker. He realized they were his fans, and suddenly Shinji walked into the office. The protagonist realized it, and it seemed he was also happy about it. They had succeeded. After the situation, he thanked the guys and said he was very happy that they had actually found his videos useful, but he believed their own efforts played the main role. They had only come this far and become seekers, thanks to their own strength. He was terribly weak as a seeker, so he was counting on their help. At that moment, Akito and Yachiro were very surprised to hear this speech, and shouted that he was a very humble person. That's so mature, he's really cool. At that moment, Sakura suggested that they had already been accepted into this guild, and the protagonist looked at the floor and thought, if we take Eva, there are already 3 seekers in his guild. why don't they try to include these guys too? He asked the guys if they were free now. Akito asked again, should they get down to business right away? The protagonist said he wanted to go to the dungeon and raise their levels. It was time to learn how leveling worked. After a while, Xeniculus appeared before them, shouting that they would soon be working, when Akito suddenly reacted with fear to Xeniculus and shouted at him not to approach the leader, the filthy monster. Xeniculus was dumbfounded by what he heard, when suddenly Shu turned to Akito and stopped him, saying that this was their friend, his spirit. Akito turned around in fear and stopped. To level up these guys, he decided to take them to the dungeon in Shinjuku. Since they had the opportunity, he decided to invite Eva along too. In enhanced mode, Xeniculus is too strong and requires a lot of money, so he would like to increase the number of allies and, if possible, raise their levels. He wanted to level up these two guys so they could defend dungeons as a group, so he needed to check something. Slime monsters appeared in front of them, and Shu turned to Akito and asked if he could lend him his sword. Akito replied that he would do so without a problem, and Shu grabbed the weapon and cut the monsters into several pieces. He asked Akito if he had gained experience. Akito replied no. First, experience points are not awarded to the weapon's owner unless they defeat the monster. Now they should move on, and Shu cut his hand with the sword. He turned to Yachiiro and asked her to heal him. She used her healing skills, and his wounds healed. At that point, he continued the fight, destroyed the enemy, and asked again if she had gained experience. Yachiiro replied yes. Second, he had long known that this is how it works. Healers gain experience if the person they healed kills the monster. He turned to Akito and asked, Fire Charm lasts for 10 seconds, right? Akito asked again, but how did he know that? Akito smiled and said it was a company's secret, and that he could use the skill on his sword. Fireblade is a skill that allows you to apply flames to any weapon. This increases the power of your blows and leaves burns. Shu again targeted the monsters and began fighting the slimes, destroying them piece by piece. After the fight, he turned to Akito and asked if he had gained experience. Akito shouted in surprise that everything had worked. This was the protagonist's third conclusion, since experience is awarded when the adventurer helps kill a monster with a skill. Eva wondered what he was doing. He replied that he just wanted to check something. He finally understood why he was getting experience for those videos. He was, to one degree or another, helping kill monsters with his skills. This was the principle of experience distribution, and he would use it to speed up the leveling process. After a while, Akito exclaimed in admiration that this was so cool. Shu asked him, what exactly? Akito shouted that he meant the level, since he hadn't done anything yet and had gotten to level 20. Yachiiro turned around and said that she, too, had been healing him, but had only gotten him to level 10. The protagonist told them to relax since they were helping in the battle with their skills. Eva explained that usually, everyone levels up by fighting monsters themselves. Perhaps he had this mindset because he leveled up through videos, but he wanted Akito to level up by enchanting Xeniculus and Eva. In that case, Yachiiro would gain experience by healing their wounds. Akito remarked that he didn't know leveling up could be so fun. Yachiiro noted that he was right, since it had been very difficult for him at first. The protagonist realized that dungeons were a graveyard for humans, and it would certainly be bad if they leveled up without learning anything. However, a high level would help them avoid fatal wounds. He wanted to minimize any risks. After all, they were his dear comrades. The guys looked at each other with strange emotions, and suddenly Akito shouted that everything was just fine, and he would give it his all to quickly become useful to the guild. Yachiiro slapped him back and shouted that she would try her best too. Eva asked if he was sure they could level up so quickly. The protagonist asked her not to worry, as everything had been thought out. It was possible that a sudden leveling up could affect the adventurer's physical health. In his case, his stats had increased terribly slowly, so he didn't have to worry about that. He thought that 5 levels a day would be enough. Tomorrow, they would return here to raise another 5 levels. One day, they would become the strongest group of adventurers in the world. After this training, they returned to the city. The protagonist lay in his bed and reflected on how much had changed since he started making videos online. He'd reached level 100 and founded his own guild, so it was good that his views weren't dropping. Perhaps it was time for him to consider a rematch with the Dark Elf from the Sky Fortress. A new message arrived on his phone, and he wondered if someone had emailed the guild. At that moment, he saw the message. The Thousand Blade Cup, a plan to clear the Sky Fortress. He exclaimed and jumped up in bed. Clearing the Sky Fortress? Rank dungeon. This is the Sky Fortress, one of the most difficult dungeons in all of Japan. It's home to powerful monsters that reward a lot of experience. In other words, by going there, he can earn a huge amount of experience. The adventurers have already entered the Sky Fortress, a dungeon of A rank. This is the Sky Fortress. This operation is being carried out at the initiative of the strongest guild in Japan, the Thousand Blade Cup. The protagonist was surprised by what had just happened, and widened his eyes in amazement. After some time, his experience had increased numerous times. Since the very beginning of the expedition, he had gained a whole bunch of experience from monsters he had posted videos of online. They were curious to see what floor they could reach, as he had gained so much experience today. He opened the system window and wondered how many levels he would gain today. He had already surpassed 100 levels, and one could say he had reached rank A, but his stats still left much to be desired, and yet, his skills had grown significantly. Most of them were still focused on support. In that case, he simply needed the help of other adventurers. Akito and Yachiiro, and of course Eva, would have to help him, and dungeon clearing was the key to leveling them up. Suddenly, Shu received an incoming call from Sakura. He picked up, and she apologized for bothering him on his day off, But could he please come to the guild? He asked again. Is something wrong? She informed him that a guild in the United States wanted to commission an appraisal from him. After some time, he arrived at his office and asked what the order was. Sakura informed him that a writer had found an item that the appraisal sheet didn't work on. In the event of failure, they were prepared to pay them 500,000 yen. He was surprised and asked again. Had he misheard that? What did "in case of failure" mean? What would they get for success then? Sakura announced that they would be given 100 million yen for success. The protagonist was dumbfounded and asked again. What? Are they crazy? She replied that she was surprised too. And Shu asked again, which guild needed his services? Sakura replied that it was the Purple Mist Guild, one of the 5 strongest guilds in America. He asked again, but how could such a cool guild know about newcomers like them? Sakura shouted that he should know how famous they were abroad. And of course, Purple Mist was much more famous than them, so she advised him to accept the offer so that more people would know about his abilities. He replied that she was right, so he agreed. Tell her to tell them that he was ready to help at any time. He really wanted to raise the guild's status, but at the same time, he was curious about what item they had found. Sakura turned to him again and said that she had conveyed his answer, and they replied that they were ready to come right away. He screamed, "Now? Aren't they in America?" At that moment, he realized Japan and the United States were connected by a magical gate, allowing instantaneous travel. Ordinary people barely had the money for such luxury, but the 5th largest guild in America could afford it. A few minutes later, Sakura knocked on the door and announced that representatives of the Purple Mist were already here. The protagonist was worried, but replied that everything was fine. Sakura asked if he spoke English. Shu chuckled and scratched his head. He asked if sign language would be okay. She replied that in that case, she would translate everything herself. When she approached the door, she apologized in English, and the protagonist realized that this was his first time speaking to foreigners. He wondered what kind of people they were. She opened the door, and the protagonist was greatly surprised. A bright flash of light appeared in front of them, and he rolled backwards in fright and fell onto the table. Sakura turned around and asked what was happening to him. He mentally wondered, what kind of mana is this? Did they really do this on purpose? Who was the owner of this mana? One of the guild members was surprised and asked again, had he seen his mana? It was a confident guy who immediately settled into a comfortable position on the couch. So he really was an appraiser? He had already begun to think the rumors were false. He was incredibly tall and walked closer to the protagonist, pinning him against the wall. After which he introduced himself as 7 Red. Now they would be acquainted. Shu, frightened, wondered what those stats were. He was 22 years old, level 125, with 5400 mana and 8100 strength. He was an A-rank adventurer, just like Shizuka, but the amount and density of his mana was simply incredible. What kind of monster was this? He couldn't understand why 7 looked like a monster. He was dumbfounded, thinking about how his stats weren't just as impressive, but also his skills. He was a dragonoid. 7 was stunned and muttered, he can even say that. What else did he see? He should take a closer look. The protagonist couldn't speak with a trembling voice, when suddenly one of the guild members shouted, 7, what is he doing? He shouldn't be rude to their business partner. 7 apologized for what happened, but he really was a good person. Sakura grabbed the protagonist's shoulder and asked if he was okay. He replied in surprise, yes, it just felt like he'd been shaken. John apologized for what happened and said his name was John Ennard, currently the leader of the Purple Mist Guild. Next to him was a ranked adventurer, 7. And these were his lawyer and secretary who were assisting him. Sakura said he'd already said that. The protagonist also introduced himself and said that Sakura was his lawyer. He wondered if this person wasn't adventurer. However, most guilds have adventurers representing their interests. In this respect, they resemble their guild, the Art of Analysis. At first, they wanted to enter into a non-disclosure agreement with them. They submitted a document, and the main contract stipulated that they must not disclose to anyone the item they were evaluating, and not disclose any information obtained during the evaluation. In that case, they'd like to get straight to the point. Please let him look at a photograph of the item. He handed over a tablet with a photograph of an old document and a magical symbol. The hieroglyphs on this parchment did not belong to any language on Earth. They had a team working on a translation, but there were no results. Shu asked where they found this item. He reported that it was from the A-rank Uberam dungeon on the very top floor. It had been brought from uncharted territory. Shu said he apologized for what had happened, but he could only use the evaluation directly on the item itself. John asked him to bring it and hand it to him. The item was inside a secure box. The protagonist examined it carefully and thought that it was very well protected, and he believed it was truly an artifact from an A-rank dungeon. As he took the item from the box, 7 yelled at him to stop. He leaned on the table and asked if he knew why he was here. He was here to stop him if he tried to destroy the item, so don't let him do anything weird, okay? Shu laughed and replied that he would never do that, but now they needed to move on to assessing the item, and his hands began to tremble. He carefully began assessing the item and began to speak abruptly, causing Sakura to ask if something was wrong. He continued to carefully observe the item, and tears began to flow onto the item itself. 7 asked what was going on. Sakura started screaming. Is he okay? He apologized and said that nothing had happened, wiped away his tears, and announced that he had finished assessing it. John was surprised by this, and Shu explained that this item was a recipe for a panacea for all illnesses and injuries, a recipe for the necessary elixir. All the raw materials consist primarily of blood. Dark elf, giant, leviathan, moon tiger, saber sigma, zero medusa. Apparently to make it, they need to use the blood of all these species. Besides the dark elf, he hadn't heard of any other monster species. 7 chuckled distantly. Leviathan? The company lawyer started yelling at him, but John stopped him and said it was okay. Let him continue talking. They returned alive after encountering the monster on the very top floor of the Ouroboros dungeon. In other words, it was a boss. It was a sea serpent worthy of the name Leviathan. That's all they know from Seven. He's the only person to have defeated it. The protagonist realized that Seven really was that strong, and they exchanged glances. He then clenched his fist, and John announced that for it to be an elixir recipe, he believed it was a worthy reward from an A-rank dungeon. They needed to gather the ingredients, but that would be problematic, but knowing the composition was enough. He turned to the protagonist and said they would like to continue their collaboration. Now they were asking him to accept the promised reward, but Shu said he didn't need it. Sakura screamed, "What does that mean?" He replied that instead, please let them lend him 7 for a bit. He asked, surprised, what he just said. John was also surprised and asked, "What do you want?" Shu announced that there was a dark elf in the Sky Fortress dungeon whom he wanted to defeat, and therefore he would need Seven's help. Zaniculus, Eva, Seven, and Shizuka were his team. If they were with him, he would be able to defeat the Dark Elf. Once they defeated the Dark Elf, he would donate the creature's blood to their guild. If Seven agreed to cooperate, then, even though it would be a joint attack, they would be considered the first to defeat him. Seven laughed and, approaching him, asked if he wasn't thinking of something wonderful. He wouldn't mind collaborating. John shouted that he was being selfish again, and Seven raised his hands in agreement. He then declared that he was a true appraiser, a rare class that could never be replaced, so they had better earn their favor. John thought for a moment and then spoke, but then 4 people died. The Dark Elf crushed them like insects, among them those who had first recognized him as a seeker. He clenched his fist and shouted that he wanted revenge and was asking to borrow his power. The boys thought for a moment, after which John exhaled and said he understood everything. Until that day, he, Seven, and the Purple Mist would help him. After a while, Eva apologized for being late, but Shu went to meet her and told her that it was he who had arrived early. It was still 10 minutes before the appointed time. He looked at her carefully. Eva was incredibly beautifully dressed. Shu thought about how fashionable Eva's casual clothes were. She asked him where they were going today. He apologized and said he hadn't told her yet, but something would happen today. They entered a huge city hospital building, and Eva asked if they were at the hospital now. He replied that he wanted her to meet someone. Eva was upset that it wasn't a date, but suddenly Shu looked at her questioningly and she realized she was feeling very awkward. Then Eva asked if this man was admitted to this hospital. He replied, yes. When they entered the office, they saw Yotsuba Kaede lying under observation. This was his childhood friend, who hadn't woken up for 3 years. Her heart was beating calmly, as shown on the machine, and she lay unconscious. All this happened because of the monster attack 3 years ago. They escaped from the dungeon, killing many people. That day, he was in town, and then a huge monster with very sharp claws appeared right in front of his face. This creature pounced on Shu, but Kaede suddenly protected him with her body, tears in her eyes. He was dumbfounded and screamed her name as her blood spilled. She fell asleep after protecting him. Rescuers arrived immediately, but it was of no help. They barely saved her life with the potion, but she was still asleep, so he became a seeker to save her. Eva was stunned when she learned the whole tragic story. Even though he said it, they both lost their parents during that breakthrough. He was doing everything he could to pay the hospital bills, and finally had a ray of hope. Eva asked him again, why did he bring her here? He replied that after all, she was his first partner, and he wanted her to know that. Eva looked him in the eyes, then lowered her gaze and said that she would definitely collect everything for this elixir. She would try her best, if only he would say so. Shu blushed with embarrassment and scratched the back of his head, thanking her again. They must hurry and help Kaede open her eyes, otherwise the competition will not start. Shu asked again, a competition with Kaede? What is this? Eva replied that it was a secret. Soon after, it was time to defeat the Dark Elf. Sometime later, a journalist with a microphone approached Shizuka and announced, here she is, ready to enter the Sky Fortress, the guildmaster and leader of the Blood Idols, Shizuka. During the guild's previous expedition, the Thousand Swords Chalice had failed to reach the lower floors, but this time, they were partnering with a major foreign guild. Were they aiming to completely clear the dungeons? Could she share their strategy or precautions? Shizuka apologized, but she couldn't discuss anything. The expedition leader was Shu, who was preparing to enter. The guys arrived at the lower floors of the Sky Fortress sometime later. The boss room was more than 5 floors away, so they needed to go through the plan again. All the guys were confident and focused on what was happening. The protagonist announced that their first order of business was recruiting 100 high-ranking adventurers from renowned guilds to serve as their support. This was necessary to assess and calculate the Dark Elf's range, the scale of his magic, and the speed of his attacks depending on his position. Seven turned to the leader and asked if the Dark Elf was using magic. What was the likelihood of him stealing their mana? And since he could leave the boss room, wouldn't he be targeting their support? Shu replied that he was, and that was why he was using his Spirit Warrior skill. This skill allowed him to summon spirits that obeyed him. They were unconscious, but they could use the same skills as him and functioned correctly. He left one outside to maintain communication. Seven remarked that this was another interesting ability. Eva also reacted with surprise and declared that this skill was truly magnificent. Shizuka collected her thoughts and asked what exactly they needed to do to defeat the Dark Elf. Although they now had greater combat power, that didn't change the fact that they didn't know the exact number of enemies. Shu waved his hand and said he'd leave this to the spirit Zaniculus, whom he addressed and shouted for it to appear in a strengthened form. Zaniculus appeared before him and declared that he would carry out any order his master gave him. Seven thought with a smile, thinking that seemed quite powerful. Shizuka asked what he would do with this A-rank spirit. He replied that he had 2 plans. The first was to defeat the Dark Elf with the help of the Orochi Snake God. Magical attacks were ineffective against this, as it would irritate the enemy, who primarily used them. However, the Dark Elf defeated it last time, so he believes it was a physical attack enhanced by magic. So he snapped his fingers, and several more spirit warriors appeared before him. They could use the same skills as him, so they could use the copy skill on the summoner outside, which would allow them to gather all the useful spirits. Xeniculus could use teleportation, which would transport the spirit to battle the elf, and then fight to protect the Orochi and the other spirits. Shu was confident in his abilities, and stated that, at best, this would be the end of it, but more likely, they would be destroyed. In that case, they would use the second plan. Most likely, the Dark Elf would detect their location through mana. He has the Eagle Eye skill, which gives him excellent vision. He would see where it was approaching, and meanwhile, Seven and Shizuka would set an ambush along the way. Even if it doesn't defeat him, he'll definitely take damage, and at least they will have time to resummon the Orochi. Shu touched the gate with his hand, and Seven asked, "Sounds good, right? He wants to fight this Dark Elf personally." Shizuka replied that with their experience, they could handle any unforeseen situation, and suddenly Eva screamed in fear that the Orochi had been defeated. Suddenly, the protagonist used his eagle vision and realized that he was there, looking for them. Now he had a good idea of his physical abilities. He shouted, "Guys, get ready for battle. He'll be here in 2.5 minutes. They wondered how this could have happened. The elves were already on their way. Suddenly, Xeniculus arrived at their side and shouted, "Master!" He extended his hand and grabbed the protagonist, dragging him along with him. Suddenly a loud explosion occurred, and numerous rocks flew everywhere. The girls tried to cover their faces with their hands from the numerous fragments. Shu examined the entrance and saw that the elf had blown up the gate and arrived at their place. And here he was, they were caught. He told her that he had excellent guards, right? It was a survival technique for the weak. The protagonist was dumbfounded by what he saw, and thought it was simply impossible. Could there really be two of them? The elf girl asked, "Are these the people he was talking about? They didn't look very strong." The boy asked, "Did he say they were strong? They were just lucky to escape." But that would never happen again. They were confident in their strength and looked at their opponents. The protagonist gritted his teeth in tension because he hadn't planned on this. There should only be one boss in the dungeon, and this girl was as strong as the elf boy. Moreover, she specialized in physical attacks. What should they do? Maybe they should escape through the Xeniculus teleporter? No, it can only teleport 5 floors at a time, but what could it do in that case? Defeating the monster requires 3 adventurers of the same rank, so they're now in trouble. What should he do? While he was pondering the situation, the elf girl said she was greatly irritated by the people standing in her way, so she would kill him first. With these words, she used her magic powers and headed towards Shu, who realized she was very fast and used the Earth Dragon. At that moment, the dragon protected him and blocked her path. It was Seven, who had transformed into a dragon and could now enhance all kinds of abilities by transforming into different dragons. The Earth Dragon significantly increases attack power and defense. At that moment, Shu was stunned, and Seven asked, should they run or fight? He hoped he would decide quickly. Shizuka said that they all hoped so and took a step, expressing their trust in him. She also used her powers and asked, grabbing her sword, "What will they do now, leader?" All the guys prepared for battle, and after a moment of silence, Xeniculus turned to his master, who suddenly exhaled and announced, "Destroy the Dark Elves." Xeniculus and Shizuka would deal with the guy, and Seven and Eva would take care of the girl. The guys understood and began to carry out the order. The elf mentioned that some were missing last time. What did she think about that? The elf girl replied that she had failed to kill him twice and was furious. It really irritated her. He patted her on the shoulder and said that he simply had good guards, so they should proceed and kill them all. Shu used his magical powers and began shouting, "Xeniculus, he's using a high-ranking fire spell, teleport." He replied that he would do as he ordered and teleported all his comrades. They were able to hide under his wings, and the elf said that his abilities were a great hindrance to them, and he thought they were getting better. Meanwhile, Shu turned to Seven and asked him to protect him until they summoned the Orochi again. Let them try to separate them. They were ineffective against team attacks. Seven responded, "Okay," and began fighting, landing a blow that sent the elves flying in different directions. The girl asked, "Do you really think he can keep her at bay? That's why she hates humans. They don't understand natural hierarchy." At that moment, she swung her leg at Seven, who took damage and spilled blood. She smiled and said, "How long will it take for him to give up?" A moment later, he was healed by a potion, and the protagonist used a magic circle, musing that thanks to the protection, they had a lot of elixirs. His appraisal skill might be slowly improving, but his physical rank was at least pro level. Seven turned around, and Shu shouted at him that he should rely on him for his healing and not worry, continuing to advance on his opponent. He clenched his fist and screamed, "Yes," then turned to the girl and told her to come closer. "You horrible brat." The elf girl said he was really pissing her off, and at that moment, Shizuka used her magical powers to try and damage the boy. Xeniculus, on the other hand, was also running toward him, but suddenly an explosion occurred, sending a multitude of rocks flying everywhere. He managed to defend himself, and Xeniculus wondered if he was using his spells too quickly, using all his strength to teleport quickly, and they had a strong defense that even Shizuka couldn't counter. Honestly, things looked pretty bad. First of all, they had a huge gap in strength, and their attacks weren't working. Shu realized things were only getting worse, and that a single glance was enough in a battle of endurance, and they would definitely lose. But he wondered if he'd managed to convince them of that. He shouted at Xeniculus to teleport everyone but him to another floor, and suddenly cast a copy spell, Dragonoid. The protagonist opened his mouth and unleashed magical energy. The elf boy wondered what kind of pressure it was. It was a wide-range supersonic wave. They couldn't escape it without teleportation. It was dragon breath. The elves were dumbfounded by what they saw, and the boy began to defend himself, screaming as he erected multiple barriers. He asked the girl to stand behind him, when suddenly his barriers shattered into pieces, creating a bright explosion and flash of light. After a while, blood spilled onto the ground, and the elf wondered what was happening. His friend had been destroyed by such a powerful blow. They were always together. They gave each other names, Ha and Da. It was the only thing they had. But it was enough. Da sat on the floor and looked at Ha's body, who was lying in a pool of blood. MC thought, there's one. In this state, they won't be able to fight. Now the tide of the battle has changed. A scream came from behind. Master, Zenikuris asked him to never act alone again. He knows that he can't resist his orders, right? Seven asked, so what did he do? Shu answered, he used an ability skill. Seven Red's most powerful attack is Dragon Breath. The distinctive feature of this attack is sound. It has such a large range that it can cover the entire floor. MC accumulated enough mana to break through the Dark Elves' defense, and he didn't tell anyone about it, so the elves would think they could survive it. He ruffled his hair and asked for forgiveness. He couldn't risk it. What if someone gave away the plan by their behavior? Shizuka said she wanted to pay attention to many things, but right now she needed to focus on the battle. There was still one elf here. Da asked why she covered him with herself. Ha? He was the one responsible for defense. She remembered. Ha asked him to forgive her. She was going to. She must be disgusting to him. She acted like a human. Da frowned and replied, no, as if they had something in common with those horrible people. He looked up at them and asked, was there really no end to their stupidity? If they had killed them, they would have continued to enjoy their world. They came to the dungeon just to finish them off. They say it's for resources or civilization, but in reality, it's only to satisfy their desires. Shizuka stepped forward and ordered him to shut up. The monsters that burst out of the dungeons, they took many lives, and he also killed 4 of her comrades. She's here for them. Da spoke, so they're in the same boat. There's no more reason to fight. They kill each other because they get in each other's way. Ha, and he hate them with all their hearts, but let them be warned, if they kill him, then humanity will have no future. MC asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Da replied, he killed them for their own good. They stopped them, no matter how stupid they were. Is she ready, huh? She whispered, yes. They held hands, and she said, she loves him. Shu's eyes widened in fear, and ordered everyone to attack with all their might. Everything will be terrible if you let them do this. A strong wind spread through the space, and MC thought, what kind of mana is this? The estimate did not show where it is coming from. Horror, he needs to be careful. He needs to rethink everything and come up with a new plan. Zenikuris screamed, Master. He covered Shu with his body, and feathers flew in different directions. Zenikuris whispered, Master, let him run. Shizuka screamed in fear, Asura, let him hurry up and use the appraisal. A sword fell to the floor, and Eva asked, what is this? Ha, and Da's bodies merged into one elf, and he said, one killed. They dealt with the traitor. Humans, how could those who haven't even conquered the Archangel dungeons think they could clear a Seraphim-ranked dungeon? MC wondered, what is this? Did it say Seraphim? 2 dark elves merged into this. The system reported, A-rank Seraphim. Shu thought, why only? 7 interrupted his thoughts and shouted, Shu, what about the appraisal? He replied, he doesn't see his stats. Seraphim said, don't be so surprised. Didn't he explain earlier that magic doesn't work on gods? It's obvious that his abilities won't work on him. After all, he's a divine being. Does he understand the difference between them? Has he realized how helpless and arrogant he is? And soon, he will show him the difference in their strength. He raised his hand up and created an energy seal, saying, summon divine armament. MC frowned and thought, he's aiming at him. He thinks he can still use observation, but he needs time to dodge. He walked forward, and the seraph swung his sword right at his face. 7 appeared in front of MC, whose hand the seraph cut off. He frowned and said, Nightmare. This is his strongest form, and he doesn't care. The seraph said, good reaction, but there is no scale that can withstand his divine sword. Now, how about cutting off his left hand? Eva rushed forward and shouted, summon divine armament. She will protect him, Shu. The seraph laughed, and MC thought, what's going on? He can neither assess him nor predict his moves. He's nothing but a burden. His comrades are forced to protect him again. He clenched his jaw and thought, because of him, Zenikuris. Suddenly, he heard his voice, Master. MC shouted, Zenikuris? He asked to forgive him. He couldn't teleport in time and had to sacrifice his physical body. He asks him to hold on until he can be summoned again. Shu clenched his fist and thought, they still have a chance to win. As long as they have Zenikuris' teleport, they can use this plan. 7 turned around and said, he thinks his spirit has perked up, leader. MC spoke, 7, they need to deal with him. Before he could finish, 7 asked him not to worry about it. Dragon change. Earth dragon. His body transformed into a more ferocious form, and MC asked, is he immortal or something? 7 answered, it's like lizard regeneration, but he can't do it all the time, so from now on he will fight at full strength. 7 roared loudly and rushed towards the seraph. He tried to grab his sword, but the seraph quickly swung it. It cut his chest and blood spurted out. Shizuka swung her weapon and tried to attack, and the seraph quickly struck and cut it. The seraph struck Shizuka in the stomach with his sword, and blood gushed out of her mouth. She fell to the floor, and the seraph created an energy seal and said, it must be hard to be so pathetic. Let them fall to dust. Bright mana headed towards Shizuka and 7, but Eva screamed, summon divine beast, snake god Orochi. She screamed and began to strike at the seraph. She held on with the last of her strength, clenching her jaws. The seraph said that he thought only she could fight now, but but it wouldn't be for long. MC thought, right. If this continues, they will lose. There's only one option left. Some time ago in the office, they asked him, Plan B? This is a plan in case his assessment doesn't work. If they use this, then he is sure they will defeat him. However, in this case, they won't get the Dark Elf's blood. He clenched his fist and thought, with Plan B, they can defeat the Dark Elf Seraph, and all of them will survive. But the reason he went this far was all for Kade. If he abandons them and teleports with Xenocurse, then he can try again. After all, Eva screamed. Shoo, she will try to defeat him, so don't let him dare think about that plan. MC's eyes widened in surprise, when suddenly the Seraph knocked the sword out of Eva's hands. She flew to the side and fell to the floor. She opened her eyes slightly, and the Seraph turned around and said, Great, now the most helpless one is left. It seems he has some kind of plan. Why doesn't he use it? Eva turned around and screamed. Shoo, no, she can still fight. He looked at her with a slight smile and thanked her. He ordered the spirit warriors to come. The Seraph asked, what now? As far as he could see, they weren't strong. It didn't matter how many weak copies of him there were. MC ordered him to just watch. This was the last thing he had prepared. He activated the storage and thought the spirit warriors could use the same skills as him. At the moment, his storage capacity was equivalent to an entire stadium, and so he placed modern weaponry in there. The Seraph asked, puzzled, modern weaponry? Shu thought they were usually useless in a dungeon. Magic not only surpassed this in firepower but was also safer to use. However, the Dark Elf, he would destroy the entire dungeon. The Seraph's eyes widened in confusion, and MC ordered Xenocurse to come. He grabbed Eva and shouted, Spirit warriors, kill him! The ammunition was directed towards the Seraph, and the players were transported to another location. Eva looked at him and said, Shoo. He apologized to Kade. Apparently, she would have to wait a little longer. He was born in an elven village. Elves have snow-white skin and golden hair, but he was different from them. His skin was black, his hair white, and it was impossible to tell for sure whether he was a man or a woman. But more importantly, he had a huge reserve of mana. He was disgusting to the other elves, and when they drove him out of the village, they nicknamed him a Dark Elf. He was forced to wander the world alone. In the end, he got used to both discrimination and travel. Only one thing bothered him. Some time ago, an elf was sitting by a tree and saying that he was so lonely. Exactly. He just needed to stop being one. So, using the unique magic of the Dark Elves, he divided himself into two creatures, a man and a woman. Everything is fine as long as they have each other. At this moment, everything in the dungeon began to collapse, and large chunks of concrete fell on the Seraph's body. He said, he can't heal himself in time. Modern weaponry, of course. So, this is the history of mankind. What foolish creatures they are. They brought about their own destruction. He hoped that someday they would realize this and fall into despair. He stretched his hand up and said, he was so lonely. Another gunshot rang out, and the players asked in fear, why is everything shaking? Is it coming from the dungeon? The guy pointed his finger to the side and ordered everyone to look. They're back. MC's team returned and he said, they destroyed the Dark Elf. He asks that they heal them as soon as possible. The girl turned around and answered, of course. Senguji Tsurugi said, he thinks the heroes have returned. He is the guild master of the Thousand Swords Bowl. Senguji is the master of a large guild and also an A-rank adventurer. He called him because he is strong. He said that he would prefer not to fight the Dark Elf directly, so he put him in charge of defending the base. MC replied, he is not a hero. He was just getting in the way. Senguji grabbed his face and said, if he were smart, he would act bolder in front of the crowd. Does he want to make the people who followed him regret this decision? He won because he was there. Well, let him rest well and leave the cleaning to him. MC called out to him and said, he will tell you just in case if he escapes with the loot then. Senguji replied, yes, he knows. Let him trust him at least a little. Shu thought, right, now is not the time to be depressed. There are many things he needs to do and think about. Suddenly a loud scream was heard. A message, a message. The guy ran and shouted, breaking news. A huge dungeon appeared in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. A huge number of monsters broke out from it. Panic is starting among the people. MC said, impossible. It never happened without a breakthrough. Senguji asked to tell everything in detail. The guy said, some time ago, today at 3 o'clock, a strong earthquake began. After that, a huge dungeon appeared and a bunch of monsters broke out from it. All adventurers from the Asia-Pacific region have headed there. All battle-ready adventurers are being called to help with the cleanup. After a while, the guys were watching the video on their phone, and Senguji said, this is truly crazy. He mentioned that A-rank adventurers had gone there. To think things were that bad. Shu thought, even though they want to help, Eva and the others are currently wounded. And the dungeon appeared immediately after the defeat of the Dark Elf. This can't be a coincidence. What's going on? There was a scream. Senguji, they found a magical device in the boss room. It looks like a transmitter. It can translate any language. Shu's hands began to shake as he remembered the Seraph's words, that he kills people for their own good. He silently asked them not to tell him they didn't do everything in the right order. They were only supposed to learn the elixir recipe at the very end. Come to think of it, that's how dungeons work. The monster's strength gradually increases to make the adventurers stronger, just like in the game. Does this mean that someone wanted them to clear all the A-rank dungeons and then defeat the Dark Elf? However, his assessment ruined everything. With their current strength, they are unable to clear even an A-rank dungeon. Most likely, this new dungeon will be several times more difficult than the Sky Fortress. There is no way they can stop this breakthrough. Senguji asked, what's wrong? MC replied, it's all his fault. He remembered Da's words. If they hadn't killed him, their world would have continued. That's what he was talking about. Shu grabbed his head and said, someone suggested that they could handle this breakthrough. If someone was capable of defeating the Dark Elf, then they would have somehow. He was interrupted by a shout. Eva, Shu, it's not his fault. MC looked down and said, Eva, she asked, What's wrong with adventurers clearing dungeons? So what if they cause this disaster? She put her hands on his shoulders and said, it's not too late. Seven opened the door and said, there he is, depressed again. He didn't know that dungeons are cleared as a team, Shizuka said. He just feels responsible for it. It's a good leadership quality. Someone asked if they were being too lenient with him. MC smiled and said he will stop this breakthrough. He asks them to help him with this. After a while, someone asked, can they really not understand each other? Then he suggests sticking to a simple plan. A shout rang out, forward. A guy with a huge axe attacked a huge monster and cannons fired shells. MC asked, are they handling them? Apparently, there are no strong monsters here. Senguji said thoughtfully, they shoot at the flying idiots with 5-inch bullets from the MK-45. And the A-rankers take on those who are in the sea or survive the shot. A good plan of action, considering the tight deadline. MC asked Zenikuras to teleport him closer to the dungeon, just to make sure. The rest should stay here and fight. Zenikuras said, dear customer, he didn't know that he teleported him all the way here and he has no mana left. MC replied, he can use perfect form. Zenikuras thanked him for his cooperation. They headed towards the dungeon, and MC thought, he feels a staggering amount of mana from this vortex. But then why are the monsters so weak? An old man with a trident on his head appeared in front of him, and Shu thought, what is this? His mana reserves are on par with or even higher than the Dark Elves. And the worst thing is, he can't see his skills. The enemy created a huge magical tsunami that spread throughout the water. MC thought, what a nightmare. If this tsunami covers Japan, then... He shouted, Zenikuras, let him teleport him to the warship. Eva turned around and shouted, Shu, it's a tsunami, it's so huge. What should they do? MC shouted, it's controlled by magic. If they can use enough power, they can neutralize it. He activated the storage and began to absorb the water. Shu shouted, spirit warriors, let them absorb the tsunami. Eva shouted, modern weaponry. Seven shouted, dragon's breath. And Shizuka said, blood bullets. The people asked, are they trying to resist the tsunami? In that case, they'll use everything they have. Senguji frowned and said, horror, he shouldn't have come here. He, the holy swordsman Senguji Tsurugi, will do his best. He swung his sword, and MC turned around and asked, is he using divinity? Senguji asked again, divinity? Yes, that's what it's called. But he knows, no matter how strong he is, it's simply impossible. That day, the countries along the Pacific coast suffered massive damage. Shu frowned and screamed loudly, what a nightmare. After a while, houses were destroyed and trains were derailed. The news anchor said that the east coast of Japan suffered massive damage due to the tsunami caused by the breach. After the tsunami, the monsters immediately returned to the dungeon. At the moment, there is no data on whether the monsters will return, but the country is still on alert. Akito asked, President, is he watching the news about the disaster again? Ichiro said, President, she doesn't think he's responsible for this, and he tried so hard to help the affected regions, donated money. Isn't that enough? Akito screamed. Isn't it certain that this happened because of defeating the Dark Elf? If anyone tries to blame him, he will beat them up. MC smiled and thanked them. The breach caused massive damage not only to Japan but also to neighboring countries. Zenikuras miraculously managed to teleport all the adventurers off the ship in time, expending all its mana, but the tsunami devastated the entire coastline. It was confirmed that this whirlpool was a large dungeon and was given the name Watatsumi. In terms of difficulty, it received the highest rating, S rank. If the humanoid monster that caused the tsunami appears again, many people will die. According to dungeon experts at the scale of the breach, another one shouldn't happen for 10 years, but vigilance cannot be relaxed. So, a plan to clear it was developed. It was called a dungeon city. The most important thing when clearing a dungeon is defending the base. The idea was to build a floating city next to the dungeon and invite guilds from all over the world there. It won't be quick. It will take 2 or 3 years to implement the plan. And before then, they must become stronger. Shu clenched his fists and thought, there are talents that only his assessment can find. He will use this to fully unlock the adventurer's potential. That same day, a video was posted on the Asura President's channel, that is, on the Art Analysis channel. The video was called Subduing the Dark Elf. It got more views than the other videos. Comments quickly appeared under it. Is it true that Watatsumi appeared immediately after defeating the Dark Elf? Does this mean the breakthrough was the guild leader's fault? The Dark Elf was intelligent? Couldn't they have come to an agreement? The timing matches, but we can't know for sure. This information is important. Someone heard that the guild leader personally went to the tsunami and reduced its power. If it was his fault, and he went there immediately, then his rating increased from -100 to -50. There is no reason to believe these two events are connected. Shimizu said she thinks the number of votes for and against the president is roughly equal. Some adventurers support the president, but still. Saito spoke up, trying to dissuade him from posting the video several times, but he didn't listen and said he would post it anyway. However, Asura has a lot of fans who support it. Besides, his job is to edit the video as best he can so as not to ruin the president's reputation. He will not allow them to humiliate him. Shimizu smiled and said, she almost forgot. The deadline is today. Saito asked again. The deadline? She replied, yes, he understands. They've had a lot of people wanting to join their guild recently. Interviewing everyone would take too much time, so they sent the applications to the recruitment department and decided that the president would evaluate them one by one. She looked in surprise at the 1,000 unread messages and yelled, President! After a while, the MC was lying on the table, and she said with a smile on her face, he did a good job. Shu said, what a busy 2 days. They've made the interview process as simple as possible. He was just evaluating them and checking if they met the requirements. But there were so many people. They checked several dozen until they found their new talent. MC handed over the tablet and said, Shimizu, have her call these people as soon as possible. She looked at the list in surprise and asked, does he really want to hire them? He replied, yes, they needed them. they decided to hire 3, their classes. After a while, they came to the guild office, and Shu said that he was glad to see them. He asked them to introduce themselves. The guy adjusted his glasses and said, he is Utori Hakuma, an alchemist. He worked in the rear of a B-rank guild. The girl said, her name is Arakawa Mika, she's a sculptor. She was the leader of a B-rank team in an A-rank guild. The guy said slightly shyly, he is Minagishi Guren. His class is blacksmith. He worked in a C-rank guild. Mika asked again, blacksmith? Hakuma asked again, a C-rank guild. What was he doing there? Guren said he made weapons from stone and other materials. However, he was fired almost immediately. Hakuma laughed and asked for forgiveness, and Mika asked, my god, with stone weapons you can probably only fight slimes? Guren pursed his lips, and Shu noticed. He stood up and said, so, he wants to start with assigning responsibilities. First Guren. He answered, yes. MC said, he will be commanding this group, so he's the leader. Guren asked again, what? The man said a while ago, he was sure. He apologized and said he knew he was recently hired, but a small guild like theirs doesn't have the finances to carry unnecessary weight. Guren couldn't even bring himself to ask why. His class is blacksmith. As the name suggests, it grants the ability to craft equipment, but he can only make weapons from stone. Such weapons are useless in a dungeon. Some time ago, Guren was sitting on the street and thinking, he got fired again. He needs to find another guild. He hopes there will be a place that can take him. He saw a vacancy that Art of Analysis was recruiting new adventurers and said maybe they will accept him. He wonders if he can pass the test, just for fun. Currently, Mika asked puzzledly, is he appointing a blacksmith as leader? She screamed, what does this mean? She just said that she was the leader of an A-rank guild? Why should she obey someone with such a useless class? MC replied, according to his assessment, this is the best choice. It's simple. Among them, Minagishi Guren has the strongest abilities. Hakuma asked to stop. He says he is weaker than the guy who was fired from a C-rank guild? Mika screamed. She refuses to accept this. She has never even heard of the blacksmith class before. And didn't he say that he can only make weapons out of stone? They frowned in annoyance, looking at MC, but he replied, he understand. Then how about following his instructions for 1 month? If after that they change their minds, then they can return to their previous guilds. However, first, he must warn them of one thing. He is an appraiser. His eyes cannot be deceived. Shimizu thought, Asura? He was never like this before. After some time, Guren was working in the workshop, and sparks were spreading in different directions. He made a sword out of stone and happily said, great, it's done. And yet, these are just stone swords. He went so far to prepare the workshop for it, but he can only defeat the weakest monsters. Shu said that he is the strongest, but that can't be true. He looked at the swords and said, he is sure Shu will be disappointed when he sees that this is all he can do. Maybe he will get fired again. At that moment, MC looked into the workshop and asked how the blacksmithing was going. He saw that he had made several. Guren looked at him carefully, and Shu picked up the sword and happily said, good, it looks great. Let him continue making more like this. Guren answered a little shyly, okay. MC asked, by the way, where are Mika and Hakuma? He asked them for help. Guren said thoughtfully, well, they said that they were leaving. They handed him their resignation letters. He tried to persuade them not to leave, but they did not want to listen to someone like him. MC said, my god, what an irresponsible couple. Well, as long as he is here, everything is fine. Guren looked at him in surprise, and Shu asked, then he will take these swords, okay? He picked up the box and looked questioningly at the dejected Guren. He asked, why does he think so highly of him? He is an ordinary blacksmith, and he can only make useless weapons. Shu replied, Guren, a blacksmith, is not a weak class. Perhaps he hasn't realized it yet, but that's exactly what the evaluation shows him. He has big plans for Guren. Guren remembered all the words he heard when he was fired and burst into tears. After a while, Zenikuris attacked the monster and said, dear customer, it broke right away. MC replied, excellent. So he asked him to make as many as possible. Zenikuris asked what he had in mind this time. MC replied, he's leveling up a new worker so he can create the strongest weapons. He thought blacksmiths get the most experience among the support classes, about 20 or 30%, much more than his 5% for the evaluation. He may only be able to make weapons out of stone right now, but as he levels up, he's sure his skills will improve. If he can improve his skill, he'll be able to create the strongest equipment imaginable. After a while, Guren wiped his forehead and asked if he had done too much. He became distorted and said that his mana was out, but he must try his best. After all, he expects a lot from him. The system windows reported 200 experience points received, 400 experience points received, 320 experience points received, 260 experience points received. Guren looked at this in surprise, and the system window reported a level increase. The commentator asked, was the last video from the Art of Analysis? What kind of stone sword is this? It's so pathetic. Perfect for rank D. Everyone from the Art of Analysis uses them. Viewers watched the video and wrote, the sword broke on the first attack. What are they planning? Maybe this sword has some kind of secret. They noticed a sword in Eva's hands that looked like the one made by their guild's recently fired blacksmith. After a while, the commentators wrote, and today is a video with these swords? They are embarrassed by what they are trying to do. Wait, isn't that a stone? It must be made by the same blacksmith you mentioned. But this sword is iron. Wasn't he a loser, able to make swords only out of stone? And now a sword is made of steel. The MC said hello and said he is Amasora Shu from the Art of Analysis. The viewers wrote, this is a live broadcast. He rarely shows his face. Shu said that today he wants to talk about this weapon made of magic stone. The blacksmith they recently hired was able to make them after leveling up. The viewers asked, A weapon made of magic stone? What are they made of? Is it some kind of crystal? Of course it is a magic stone, isn't it? The MC replied that this weapon has unique characteristics that he wants to pay special attention to. A phoenix appeared in front of him, which the viewers quickly noticed. The creature sent a stream of fire towards him, and Shu quickly blocked it and killed the monster. He said that as they all know, inside every monster there is a crystal, which they call a magic stone. This weapon absorbs the magic stone of any defeated monster. The viewers asked, is this really true? They've never heard of such a weapon before. How is it made? MC replied, it has one special effect. Their guild's blacksmith will demonstrate it. Gurren approached MC slightly shyly, and the viewers wrote, is this really that guy? That idiot? Yeah, there's no way someone like him could make a weapon like that. Gurren put the sword to his head and created an energy seal. MC grabbed the sword and screamed. This is the second effect their blacksmith used. He channeled magic through the sword and attacked the creature, burning it. The viewers wrote in surprise, it spat out flames. Isn't that the skill of the phoenix we just defeated? No, wait. What, can a single sword change? It seems he's wrong. All the guild members have the same thing. Wait, does that mean? Shu smiled and said, this sword can use the skills of the monsters they defeated with it. The viewers quickly wrote messages. Impossible. This is amazing. It's obviously fake. It's a live broadcast. They saw everything. Gurren read all the messages in surprise, and someone wrote, doesn't that make the blacksmith incredible? He burst into tears from such words and turned away, and MC noticed that his body was shaking. He put his hand on his back and said, their guild will open sales of magic stone weapons. If they want to buy it, they should follow the link in the description. Magic stone weapons, 20 million yen. Skill change, 20 million yen. After a while, a scream was heard in MC's office. Is he firing him? Why? He started shaking MC and screaming. Did he ruin something? She replied, he misunderstood everything. Magic stone weapons are so popular that they are inundated with orders. Right now, Minagishi, he is the only one in the world who can create them. He just wanted to say that if he wishes to leave their guild to monopolize profits, then Gurren bowed his head and thanked God. MC said their goal is to make adventurers stronger, so if he wants, he can create his own website, separate from the guild website. Gurren screamed, how can he suggest such a thing? He will never leave this guild. He is a blacksmith of the art of analysis. Shu asked, is he serious? Honestly, he is glad to hear it. Gurren asked for forgiveness. He asked the president to call him Gurren. No need to address him so respectfully. He grabbed Shu by the hand and said, he is the first person who accepted him and decided to train him. It's all thanks to him, President. He started to spin from side to side and asked, President, is this chair comfortable for him to sit on? I wonder if he can make him a new one. Of course, he will make a much more comfortable chair. MC remembered Xenochorus and thought he was having deja vu. Anyway, with his current level, he can create 30 magic swords a day. Right now, he will be busy with orders for more than a week, but maybe he will have more free time soon, or so he thought. Suddenly, Shinji entered the office and shouted, President, the Blood Idols have made 100 orders. He asked in surprise, what? But it will cost them 2 billion yen? Shimizu also ran into the office and shouted, President, Orthus Masters ordered 10 weapons. Another order. Thousand Sword Bowl ordered 30 pieces. Purple Mist ordered 200 pieces. Gurren thought, magic stone weapons have become more popular than he expected. This is a huge step forward for clearing dungeons. After a while, he adjusted his glasses and said, President, he would like to talk to him about his skills. He thinks the quality of a weapon depends on the rank of the magic stone he uses. Before, they used C-rank stones, and the weapon had one skill, but he decided to experiment, and he thinks that by using higher rank stones, you can increase the number of skills that the weapon will hold. That's why he wanted to ask him for a dark elf magic stone. If he uses an A-rank monster stone, he will be able to increase the number of skills to 4. He asked to let him do this. He wants this weapon to be his. It will be one of a kind, the strongest weapon in the world. After a while, Akito raised the sword above his head and shouted, Gurren's swords are amazing. The system window reported, a sword made from a B-rank magic stone. The skill slots are agility and attack. Akito happily said, he feels like with each use of this sword, his power increases at an insane rate. Yachiro said the same thing about her weapon. Now she can at least defend herself a little. He really is an incredible blacksmith. At the moment, the most suitable skill for magic stone swords is considered to be dexterity. This skill increases mastery of the sword and also simplifies the process of learning it. MC looked at them and thought, if things continue like this, then maybe even magic stone armor will appear. He needs to talk to Gurren about this. After some time in the office, Gurren burst into tears and said, President, Shu asked, puzzled. What? Gurren cried and said, he can't believe that someone could be so grateful to him. It's all thanks to him. President, Shu stood up and asked, what is he talking about? Or rather, Gurren needs to pull himself together. He just pushed him in the right direction. Isn't it all thanks to the fact that he's still here and hasn't given up on his dreams of becoming a seeker? Gurren continued crying and shouted, President. He grabbed him by the shoulders and said, he wants to create the strongest sword in the world for him. He wants every millimeter of it to be perfect, so it will take a long time. But when it is completed, it will undoubtedly be the strongest weapon ever recorded in history. After a while, Eva ran into the office and asked to forgive her for being late. MC looked around and said, everyone is in place, so they will begin the meeting. Everyone sat down at the table. And Shu said, the reason he gathered them here today is because he thinks the right time has come to reveal one fact, something he hasn't told any of them. Akito asked, something he hasn't told them? Eva asked the question. Even those who joined the guild from the beginning, like him? MC replied, yeah, only Gurren knows. He just couldn't find the right time to tell him, but now the world has the right to know about it. Akito asked in surprise. What is it? Some kind of secret? Shu replied, it's about how leveling up works. He thought, in the future, people will need support classes like his Appraiser or Guren the Blacksmith, so all adventurers can benefit from the appraisal, and they will also become stronger using magic stone weapons. He needs to spread the word about this so that the S-rank dungeons are cleared and the elixir is completed. For Keide's sake. After some time in the hospital, MC looked at his phone and thoughtfully muttered this comment. He read, by the way, did he hear about the accident with the blacksmith the guild from Osaka tried to train? He turned around and saw a guy being wheeled out. He performed the appraisal and saw that he was a level 3 carpenter. MC thought, he messed up. He should have foreseen this when he started uploading videos about the blacksmith. Blacksmith is still a rare class. Unlike the appraiser, there are only a few of them in the country. Of course, as soon as guilds learned about the usefulness of support classes, they immediately tried to train them. He remembered telling Saito they'd publish this video later. After a while, Shu said he'd tell him the leveling secret he'd discovered today. He wanted to announce it as soon as possible, because he'd heard that production classes were being sent to dungeons for training. He'd say it as clearly as possible. It's a waste of time, and they should stop it. From what he knew, when an appraiser shares information about a monster and then kills it, the appraiser shares the experience with it. By the same token, a blacksmith can level up if people use their weapons. Even a fire swordsman can gain experience this way if they give someone a sword that creates their skill. In other words, there's no reason to send production classes to dungeons. Less than 3 minutes after the video was published, a new era had begun, one in which production classes became the most sought after in the world. After a while, Shimizu said the video instantly went viral. Shinji said 500 million views, more than the video about defeating a dark elf. Shimizu said, and another 13 million new subscribers. Shinji said, now President Asura is the largest blogger in all of Japan, and most likely, he is also the highest ranked adventurer. Shimizu spread her hands in different directions and said, he doesn't even have any flaws, he's as pure as glass, plus he does charity work. The only problem is that their guild is too weak. After a while, MC asked, puzzled, what? They want him to hire more people? Their combat class is Lion, Akito, and Yachiro. Shimizu said, he and Guren, they are the only ones in the production support class president. The art of analysis should become a bigger guild. Shinji said, they need at least 100 adventurers. If there are more, then even better. MC said, even if they say so, they are aiming to clear S-rank dungeons. They must be both strong and trustworthy. At the very least, be as good as Eva. She heard this and glanced at him, slightly embarrassed. Shinji said that last time he only chose 3 support classes out of more than 1,000 people, and 2 of them quit immediately. Suddenly, a loud shout was heard in the hallway. He's asking for them. If he wants to talk to the president, he needs to make an appointment first. The door swung open and a man burst into the office, screaming loudly. He was Matsu Riguro. Shu looked at him in fear, and Riguro said he wanted to become part of the art of analysis. After a while, he calmed down and picked up a cup. The guild members looked at him through the crack in the door and said he was very suspicious. Eva said he was so pushy. She thought he was trying to fight them. Ichiro said she also thought he hadn't washed for weeks. Akito asked if this had anything to do with the matter. MC approached them and suggested they hear him out first. Akito said, President, he will guard him. They went inside and Shu asked. He said he wanted to become part of their guild, but why would a rank A, level 1200 adventurer want to join them? Riguro replied, curious. He really is a natural-born leader and appraiser. He grabbed his sword and asked why. It's simple. He wants to fight the strongest bosses. The list of guilds allowed to enter the S-rank dungeon Watatsumi was compiled at the East Asian Summit, and only a few guilds in Japan are allowed to enter the city near the dungeon, right? And those swords. He pointed at the sword in Akito's hands and said a weapon made of magic stone, right? He wants to try it out. MC frowned and thought, Riguro, his assessment tells him that his intentions are neither good nor bad. In terms of strength, he's on par with Kuramine and Senguji. MC waved his hand towards Akito and replied, okay. Akito asked again, President? Does he really intend to hire this suspicious man? Shu replied, however, he will be fired immediately if he doesn't follow his orders. Any violence is prohibited. Well, he thinks he understands, right? Samurai. Riguro laughed loudly and asked, so he wants him to be completely under his control? He liked him, the appraiser. Let him take the gift. He put a huge bag in front of MC, who asked, what? Riguro said, he lost to this for 3 years, but he finally won. The system window reported that it was the Mega Giant's magic stone. Shu thought, the Mega Giant is an A-rank monster. After all, it's one of the ingredients for the elixir. After a while, in the president's office, Seven said via video call that he thought a rather interesting person had joined him. Let him fight him on his next visit. Shu asked, does he know that he uses a sword? Then he will use dragon form? Seven asked again, doesn't he release weapons from the magic stone? He is good with a sword now. They will get down to business, Shu. MC asked, what's the matter? Seven folded his arms and said, they received a lot of praise after defeating the Dark Elf, so the Pentagon sent them a request. Only John knows the details, but it seems his abilities could be useful. John is currently in the Japanese branch. He wished he could ask him about it. Shu, he thinks this request will be quite dangerous. MC walked out of the office and thought, he wanted him to talk to him alone. Even Senna doesn't know the details. Why does he want to discuss with him something that only he knows? Shu got into a taxi and the driver said he thought he was busy. Is he getting enough rest? Shizaku smiled and said, Asura. MC shouted. Tachibana? Did he go to America? Shizaku said, it's been a long time. He was surprised when he learned how famous he became since their last meeting. Tachibana Shizaku, he's his senpai, who taught him everything when he first became a seeker. He's a kind person. He always helped him out even though he has such a useless class. He's an excellent seeker. But how did it happen that he became a taxi driver? Shizaku said he understands his wife's operation didn't go well, so he no longer had a reason to stay in America. Shu asked fearfully, what, exactly? Because of the breakthrough, Tachibana's wife fell into a coma. Almost like him, he became a seeker to pay for his wife's operation. Her case wasn't incurable like Keide's, but she needed a complex operation. That's why he went to America. Shizaku said there was nothing he could do about it. The outcome of the operation was unclear. Well, now he no longer had a reason to engage in such a dangerous profession as a seeker. MC looked at him fearfully, and Shizaku told him not to be so upset. Yeah, he hasn't changed at all. Shu got out of the car, and Shizaku invited him to have dinner together sometime. MC said, that sounds great. Sometime later, at the Japanese branch of Purple Mist, John said, it's been a while, Mr. Asura. He was glad to see him in good health. He apologized for calling him here without telling him anything, but he wanted to ask him something. He hopes this stays a secret as much as possible. MC replied, okay, so what's the matter? John folded his hands to his face and said, Mr. Asura, he believes he's heard about monsters appearing in American cities? Shu replied, yes, the news even reached Japan. But that's not a breakthrough, right? John replied, the Pentagon has determined the cause, and it's one adventurer who's pulling monsters out of the dungeons. Shu cried out in confusion. What? He asked them to stop and said, monsters can't leave the dungeon unless it's a breakthrough. John replied, that's right, as long as they're alive, they're returned to the dungeon, even if they're forcibly pulled out. But Mr. Asura, all the monsters they found had been dead for weeks. That's why the culprit was nicknamed Necromancer. MC repeated, Necromancer. John replied, after investigating, they have some guesses as to who it might be. His name is Tachibana Shizaku. At that moment, Shizaku got out of the car and pulling off his tie, said that he was the only one he regretted. And now that he had met him, he could give it his all. He remembered the doctor's words. Most likely his wife would never regain consciousness. On the day of the breakthrough, the house was collapsed by a monster, and his wife Remy was buried. He heard that they were doing an operation abroad that could help her. So he became a seeker, to earn money, to pay for the expensive operation. And yet, the operation failed. Shizaku sat by her bed and sobbed. He screamed, Remy, Remy! He asked her to wake up. Suddenly, his wife's body began to writhe and she rose, and Shizaku grabbed her and screamed, Remy, is she alive? She looked at him with black eyes, and Shizaku asked fearfully, Remy, she is not breathing, she does not even have a pulse. Without a doubt, she is dead. But what is going on? Could this be his class? He is a manipulator. He can control machines, weapons, and inanimate objects at will. Could he have unknowingly taken control of her body, which is essentially inanimate? Shizaku grabbed his head and screamed, horror, Remy! He really thought she came back to life. Could he hear her voice again? Suddenly, she laughed loudly and he asked, was she answering him? Wait, if you think about it, his abilities are operation and manipulation. So, maybe if he raises his manipulator class, won't he be able to control life itself? Maybe he can bring Remy back. He needs to level up quickly. Even if he takes Remy's body and freezes it, it won't last forever. But he can't take weapons into the dungeon. His abilities are not suitable for leveling up. No, wait, what did Asura say? There is no need to send production classes into dungeons. Shizaku said, I understand. Maybe he can level up using the dead? He started meeting with familiar adventurers and killing them. He grabbed the man by the head and ordered him to hunt monsters for him. The system windows reported 500 experience points received, 800 experience points received, 1200 experience points received. Shizaku told Remy to just wait. He would save her, no matter the cost. After a while, MC returned to the office, and Shimizu screamed, President, terrible news. She thinks monsters have started appearing in cities all over Japan. Shu asked her to gather everyone immediately. After a while in the office, he said, it can't be, his old mentor is against these monsters appearing. He thinks the monsters appearing in the city are no longer of use to him. After all, adventurers immediately kill them when they appear in public places. Tachibana's goal isn't the incident, but a desire to level up and revive his wife. Akito asked if he already knew his motive, so he didn't even leave demands, right? MC lowered his head and said that he believed this, because if he were in his place, he would do the same. Akito asked again, what? She replied that he might be targeting the S-rank dungeon, Watatsumi. That's where he could gain the most experience. It was only a matter of time before he infiltrated the dungeon city, which was still under construction. Eva thoughtfully asked Shu, what exactly was he planning to do with Tachibana? He remembered Shizaku saying some time ago that an appraiser was not a weak class. The power he had been given certainly had its uses. He just had to start with what he could and grow slowly. He suggested that they consider what they could do together. MC said he would catch him now. He thought the appraisal would be useful for analyzing the manipulator. After he repaid his debt, he would help him bring his wife back to life. Shu said that the incidents caused by his actions were causing a lot of trouble. Once he infiltrates the dungeon city, he's sure a capture request will be sent to all the strongest guilds. Analysis art. They're not primarily a combat guild, so they won't be called, but when that happens, Riguro entered the office and told him not to worry. MC said, Riguro, no matter how strong he is, they don't have enough adventurers capable of fighting. Suddenly, a loud shout was heard. They want to join analysis art. People were standing at the door, and Riguro said he went to the dungeon to test the magic stone weapon, and these guys pestered him about it. He thinks they're all trying to get into Watatsumi. Shimizu screamed, Why barge in like that again? He should have waited until they were looking for new people. Riguro replied, that would take too long. MC thought. His assessment sees them as neutral. They're like Riguro, just as obsessed with fighting. None of them are A rank, as one might expect, but their levels are still high. MC said, they're taking them all. Shimizu screamed, President. Shu replied, calm down, Shimizu. Let her think about it. They'll soon save time instead of interviews. Eva looked at him and said, Shu. 3 days later. According to the East Asian Summit, an intruder was discovered in the dungeon city, and guilds from all over the world asked for help in capturing him. At that moment, Shuzaku asked Remy to wait a little longer. After a while, a shout rang out in the office. President, he's finished. His special A-rank magic stone sword. Shu picked it up and the system reported, it's an A-rank sword. Skill slots, air, agility, charge, and mana absorption. Gurren said the charge skill increases his power according to how long he's been accumulating the charge. When fully charged, its power will quadruple for 3 minutes. Mana absorption works the same way as his magical eyes. This super powerful skill absorbs any magic it has blocked. Still, he thinks it's quite skillfully crafted perhaps. That's all. MC smiled and said, yes, this is excellent. Thank you, Gurren. Suddenly, Riguro approached him and asked, Blacksmith, is his sword with an A-rank magic stone not ready yet? Gurren replied fearfully, he will take care of it right now. It's just that it's a pretty rare magic stone, so he's nervous. MC thought they had strengthened their forces. The first team consists of Eva, Akito, Yachiro, and himself. Riguro and a dozen maniac fighters who followed him will form the second team. Perhaps, due to the increase in strength, they will also receive a request to capture Tachibana. The entrance to Watatsumi is at the center of the whirlpool. The first thing on the agenda is the construction of an elevator leading to the dungeon, although it's most likely that Tachibana has already infiltrated there. A strategy meeting will be held in the city under construction today. After a while, Shu walked down the corridor and thought it seemed to him that everyone except the guild leader was still living in tents. Their meeting would definitely be held in the only completed building. Suddenly, Shizuka's voice rang out behind him. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, Amasura. Shu turned around and asked, so the blood idols were invited too? That makes sense. Shizuka folded her arms under her chest and replied, does he know? 7 and Senguji are here too. 13 guilds have gathered here. To think they've all gathered to capture one adventurer. That's how dangerous Tachibana is. She thinks he's been in the dungeon for a long time, increasing his ability to control more and more items by leveling up. MC thought she was right. The more time passes, the worse it gets. How many has he already taken control of? At that moment, Shuzaku was walking along with his followers, who were carrying the coffin. He said it was fully worthy of its status as an S-rank dungeon. He never thought the first floor would be so huge. However, the monsters on the first floor were B-rank. They weren't a problem for him. The more he defeated, the stronger he would become. He waved his hand and ordered them to be killed. The monsters began to attack other monsters, and Shuzaku thought his manipulation skill was already above level 30. On one level, he could control 5 monsters, as well as command a squad 150 monsters. The defeated monsters would join him. It was a one-sided massacre. Although he needed to find the entrance to the next floor, the adventurers would catch up with him any minute. Shuzaku looked at the monsters thoughtfully and thought, in this dungeon, monsters always appeared in groups. And there was also a strange feeling that they were following some kind of instructions, as if someone was guiding them. Suddenly, a great magical tsunami appeared, covering the monsters like a wave. The water returned, and the creatures fell on the battlefield. Shizaku's followers created a barrier, and a monster came out to them and said, this is revenge for his followers. He will not hold back, human. They exchanged glances, and at that moment the water flowed further. Shizaku thought, I see, so this tsunami destroyed East Asia, washed away more than half of his zombies. The monster waved his hand and said, he thinks he can control the dead, but will he be able to cope with the number of his subordinates? Shizaku sighed and said, it doesn't look good. It will take too much time. He will end this as quickly as possible. At that moment, the heads of the followers fell to the ground, and Shizaku said, he doesn't care if he becomes a demon lord. Restructuring is the ability that this phrase causes. It connects him with the beings under his control. He can connect, separate, and transform as he pleases. Shuzaku transformed into a huge creature made of several components, and the monster spoke. He absorbed the flesh of all these corpses. Is he really human? At the meeting place for expedition participants, MC walked down the corridor and thought the expedition would be large scale. Japan, America, Korea, India, and China. Everyone from the Asia-Pacific region is participating, as well as many A-rank guilds. They have more than 10 A-rank adventurers and more than 100 B and C-rank adventurers. In the corridor, he met a girl who said she welcomes the Japanese adventurer. MC extended his hand and said, nice to meet you. He is the guild master. She interrupted him and said, she knows Amasura. He is quite famous, after all. She turned and started to leave, saying that they would count on him tomorrow. Senguji approached Shu from behind and said, so Iran, she is the master of an A-rank guild, and she fully lives up to her title. He better get along with her. MC looked at him and said, Senguji. He said, seekers healers are always appreciated. It must be tough being so popular. Yes, Amasura? He pointed his finger towards where the man stood who said he was glad to meet him. Mr. Amasura. He watches all of his videos. Shu smiled and shook the man's hand, thinking, what's going on now? After a while, he sat on the couch and thought, he's broken. So this is how exhausting fame is. 7 came up to him and handed him a drink. He said, it must be tough. This is premium black coffee. Shu stood up and said, confused, why all those people wanted to meet him. 7 chuckled and asked, isn't it obvious? After all, he will be the commander. MC asked in surprise. What? At that moment, Shuzaku looked at the drops of blood and said, he underestimated him a little. He looked at the monster's body and said, but still, he's glad he got such a valuable specimen. He extended his hand and ordered him to stand up. The monster stood up and Shizaku said, now forward. Shu asked in surprise, he's going to command? But why him? There are so many A-rank adventurers here. 7 replied, basically, all the adventurers fight in the front lines. Besides, being behind them, he can see not only their abilities but also the monsters. So who could be better for this than him? After a while in the meeting room, So Iran asked, now she hopes no one minds if Amasora Shu from Japan leads the expedition? MC wondered if they really made him the commander. He didn't think Senguji and Shizuka would recommend him. So Iran asked, is he nervous? If he's not confident he can do it, then he should refuse. If he works half-heartedly, it might kill them. 7 raised his hand and said, Amasora Shu was the group leader during the suppression of the Dark Elf. He's more than qualified, isn't he? So Iran replied, she has no doubts about the assessment, but she won't trust her life to someone who just goes with the flow. If he's not sure, then MC stood up and interrupted her, saying, Iran, he'll do it. As the leader, he can use the information he just received to command on the spot. He's confident in that. 7 whistled and Iran said, okay then. And now they're going where no man has gone before, to the S-rank dungeon Watatsumi. After a while, Gurren looked around and said, they're inside a dungeon, but there's a field here. He's never seen anything like it before. Eva said, and such a huge space, even though it's the first floor. MC looked at the ground and thought, the soil is wet. Is it raining here too? Or maybe he thinks it's better to hurry. According to the plan, each guild forms 10 groups. Then they disperse to search, forming a fan shape. This way, the guild masters remain in the center and can observe all the forces, while also calculating the karma of the area in all directions. Among the Americans, 7 Red will replace Guildmaster John. China has So Iran. Korea and India have their own A-rank adventurers as guildmasters. Japan has Eva and him. Gurren is also with them, as he is needed for sudden weapon repairs. Shizuka and Senguji recommended him as a commander, probably because of his personal acquaintance with Tachibana. In the best case, he can persuade him and resolve everything peacefully. Iran waved her hand and turned to MC. She thinks a huge number of monster corpses have been found. Most likely, the exit to the next level is somewhere nearby, right? Shu picked up the tablet, and 7 looked at the screen and asked if they should head there. MC replied, no, they continue on their way. The man asked, doesn't that make sense? Naturally, if there are corpses here, that means he fought his way through them, right? The girl said, and even if they don't advance, they might find something if they examine the bodies. Gurren said he's sure the president knows what he's doing. MC turned around and said, a clue in the soil. Eva asked again, in the soil? Shu replied, the further they go, the wetter the soil becomes. He also assessed the drops on the plants. They are created by magic, and they also know of a monster that could cover everything here with water. Most likely, this is the work of the same monster that caused the tsunami during the breach. He thinks it used the same attack against the Tachibana zombie. Iran, are there many undead among those corpses? Iran answered, that's right. The man chuckled and said, an appraiser. Come to think of it, he understands so much. MC thought, however, if Tachibana could deal with that monster, then his strength is now at least on par with a dark elf. He said nevertheless, he is sure they should go where the soil is the wettest. He suggested they hurry. On the second floor, in the lava belt, 7 looked around and said, he sees signs of a struggle. MC's eyes widened in surprise and he saw a huge crystalline creature in front of him. The girl screamed, Golem? The man said, what a huge monster. They're only on the second floor. Shu said, Mithril Golem. A rank, D rank magic, the physical strength of 2 A ranks. It won't be hard for them to defeat it. They'll knock it down using several similar skills at once. The monster began to attack and MC screamed, evaluating which skills would be effective against the Mithril Golem. He ordered an attack on his signal. 7 turned around and said, okay, leader. He put his hand out to the side and ordered Zenikuras to come. He asked him to distract the golem by running around. Zenikuras turned around and said, what a rude order. He rushed towards the monster and Shu thought, telepathy. This skill allows him to telepathically communicate with everyone he's touched before. Perhaps this is the best skill for controlling a fight. MC said that fire and wind would work effectively. First, the leader of each squad attacks with a weapon made of magic stone. If that doesn't work, have him prepare to attack according to his orders. He said, Eva, it's her turn to summon. She replied, yes. She closed her eyes and said, summon holy beast, fire god Kazuchi. Shu ordered 7 to follow her attack. He replied, understood. Flame dragon. It transformed and moved toward the creature, starting to melt it. MC thought, Mithril has high resistance to magic, but its melting point isn't that high. If they attack it with fire magic enhanced by air magic, they'll be able to melt it to the point where it won't be a golem anymore. Shu ordered everyone to prepare and fire. Everyone quickly began to attack and destroyed the monster's body. The girl adjusted her glasses and said, this is incredible. They will easily defeat an A-rank monster they've never encountered before. The man spoke. The precise information and orders had a greater impact than he expected. This is the power of an appraiser. After that, they easily defeated A-rank monsters. Several days had passed since they entered Watatsumi, and finally, on the 3rd day, they reached the 3rd floor. The system window reported a mithril golem controlled by an A rank. The creature's magic is D rank, and its physical strength is AA. MC said, Tachibana is on this floor. He is sure his level has increased a lot. There is a chance that if they let him reach the 4th floor, he will become so strong that they will not be able to stop him, so they must stop him before that. Iran said she agrees that they need to stop him as soon as possible, but he knows Tachibana well, right? How exactly did they meet? Shu replied, about a year ago he taught him, being his senior. Eva cried out, Shu. Iran asked, what? So they are friends? The girl asked, can they continue under his command? The man said, Amasora Shu, what is he trying to achieve by participating in this expedition? MC frowned and said that if they didn't trust him, he would gladly relinquish command, but in exchange, let them talk to Tachibana when they found him. Irene asked, what will he tell him? MC replied, he doesn't know about his skills yet. The man grabbed him and ordered him not to play with them. They have no proof that he won't betray them. At that moment, Shizaku swung his sword and ordered them to forgive him, but he would not allow violence against his master. The man shouted in irritation, idiot. Seven stood behind him and asked if they knew how hard he tried to stop the tsunami. Shizuka said, and if he wanted to betray humanity, would he have posted all those videos to help them? Senguji said, he thinks that sharing information at least proves that he's serious about clearing the dungeons. The man pointed at MC and shouted, that's the problem. What if he decided that clearing the dungeon was easier with Tachibana's power? Would they take responsibility if he betrayed them? Seven frowned and ordered them to forget who was in command now. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they just watched him talk to Tachibana? The man looked at him from under his brows and said, unlike rich countries like them, they were obliged to protect the resources of this dungeon. Seven asked with displeasure, what was he talking about now? They came to clear this dungeon for the sake of humanity. Iran ordered him to stop immediately. She thinks he has many allies, Shu. She will watch him. She will not take her eyes off him for a second. Would this be acceptable? The man replied, yes, but they will also watch him. The girl said, then as long as the three of them are in the same squad, she will agree. The man asked for forgiveness, his words sounding as if he suspects them of treason more than they actually did. He will watch him, but let him know it's only to prove his innocence. MC smiled and replied, okay. He's sure he would have suspected too if he were in their place. He ordered to hurry, and then they found them. The protagonist said they had found Shuzaku. He put his hand to his eye and added that he should be on this floor not far from them. If they came any closer, he would know they were here, so they should be careful. The man asked where he was now. Leia asked how many zombies he had. He replied that he had humanoid monsters and seeker zombies with him. In total, there were about 300 of them. They shouted in surprise, 300. He confirmed this and added that they were currently fighting. They were fighting a monster that looked like a woman, the queen of the undead. She had a shaman skill, with which she summoned the undead, just like Shuzaku. Shizuka asked if her ability was stronger than Shuzaku's. He replied that it was not. A shaman could also control the undead, but Shuzaku's ability was superior. If he took control of her monsters, he would win. The longer the battle lasted, the more bodies Shuzaku would receive. But right now, he's expending his strength in the battle with the shaman. He needs to attack as soon as possible. They need 3 A-rank adventurers for the fight. The rest will keep the zombies at bay. But first, he asks them to let him talk to him. So Iran put her hand on her waist and said, he already said that he wants to try. The man put his hand to his chest and said that the 3 of them would go with him. Then Seven Red pointed at himself and declared that he was coming too. Shizuka added, and then she did too. The protagonist looked at the others and thought, so everyone is coming. After that, he said, but then what about it? Meanwhile, the battle continued. Shizaku put his hand to his head and said that this must be her last undead. Then he looked at the hole in the wall above the stairs and grinning, asked, did she escape? What do people that monsters like to run away? Yes, Shu? At that moment, the protagonist and Eva approached him. Shizaku looked at them and asked, did they come together? MC replied that he was allowed to talk to him. The others would be teleporting here in 5 minutes. Shizaku closed his eyes and spoke, naive as always. That's why he couldn't stop him alone then. The protagonist clenched his fist and said, Shizaku, they don't want to fight. He's asking him to surrender. He's already assessed him. He'll never have a skill that can restore the mind of the dead. He replied, Shu, he's lying. The next second, a monster emerged from the ground, and the protagonist shouted, it's the humanoid monster that created the tsunami. The next second, the monster began concentrating a water weapon in its hand, and Eva held her sword in front of her and shouted, divine weapon, fire god, Kazuchi. She repelled the monster's attack. MC shouted, he's asking Shizaku. He must listen to him. It's impossible. No matter how many levels he gains. He replied, Shu, he has no choice but to believe he's lying. He's come so far that there's no turning back. All he can do is keep going until he finds the power he needs, just as he has no choice but to look for the elixir ingredients for Remy. The protagonist shouted, then he'll help him. Find that power for him. He's sure. No, he promises that he'll find a way while he's serving his sentence. Shizaku frowned and shouted back, how long will it take? He thinks Remy's body will last that long? He thinks he'll really let him waste his time? Then the protagonist clenched his fist and shouted, Shuzaku, he's asking, he has to come back with him. At that moment, Eva shouted, Shuzaku, she's asking him to trust Shu. He just wants to help him. And at that moment, Shuzaku placed his hand on the coffin and said, I understand. In that case, so why shouldn't he help him? The next second, the monster's body began to release dark energy, which headed straight for Eva, hitting her open mouth. Then, she fell exhausted to the ground, and the protagonist ran to her and shouted, Eva! Shuzaku walked forward and said that the curse of the dead had just entered her. How long would it take? She wouldn't last until his comrades arrived. She would surely die soon. But there was a way to save her. With these words, he reached into his pocket, then threw the vial of potion on the ground and said, "Hey Shu, he must tell him." An S-rank elixir lay on the floor. Its effect is to completely heal the body of any curses and diseases. Shizaku asked, could he abandon the person he loved? Who would he save? His childhood friend or his comrade? At that moment, Eva put her hand to her stomach, writhing in pain, and Shizaku said that, without the elixir, she would die in just a couple of minutes. Then the protagonist asked in surprise, where did he get the elixir? Shizaku then looked at the elixir in his hands and said, it seems like the bosses in Watatsumi drop 1 elixir per floor. He was sure the monster he just fought would drop 1 too. The protagonist asked, so that means he has 3 elixirs now? He replied that wasn't true. He used the first one after testing it on his wife, but apparently it doesn't work on bodies. He then opened the potion and said this is the second one. With that, he drank the entire contents and then said, Shoo, he'll only give him this elixir. At that moment, Eva winced, screaming in pain, and the protagonist called out to her in alarm. He thought, wait, they have a healer. He shouted, Zenikourus. He must hurry and teleport them away. Before he could finish speaking, Shizaku waved his hand, summoning a monster and saying, hey there. The monster charged forward, swinging a huge hammer, releasing a powerful stream of energy. MC thought it was a dwarf barrier, a barrier made of divinity. It couldn't be crossed, even by teleportation. Shizaku said it was a skill from the second floor boss. No one would help them now. So, he must show him. Whom does he love more? And whom will he sacrifice? At this moment, the protagonist sat on his knees, holding Eva, and looked at him in bewilderment. Shizaku asked if he would wake Remy from the eternal sleep she had fallen into while protecting him. Wasn't that why he had been searching for the elixir all this time? He frowned, beads of sweat streaming down his face. And at that moment, he heard Eva call out to him. He opened his eyes abruptly, looked at her, and called out to her. And she said that she had killed her mother. She had lost control and mortally wounded her. Her father had hated her power and denied it. She had never wanted this power, but he had accepted it. Tears began to stream down her face, and she cried out, finally feeling like she had a place of her own, so now she could repay him. She extended her hand to him, and smiling slightly, told him to save Remy for her. She placed her hand on the protagonist's face, then winced in pain again, turning away from him. After that, the MC reached for the potion and rising to his feet said, Eva, she must forgive him. At that moment, Shizaku looked at him, and Shu lifted Eva's head, bringing the open vial to her mouth. Then, he poured the contents into her mouth and apologized for hesitating. The next second, she opened her eyes, and he, smiling, said that he needed her strength. He needed her. If she weren't here, he would be in great trouble. She frowned, looking at him with tear-filled eyes, and then pressed herself against his chest and apologized. At that moment, the protagonist looked at her and, sighing, used his ability. He thought the poison had instantly disappeared. It seemed she was healthy again. Even with his assessment, he couldn't say how it worked, but apparently, it really did work. At that moment, Shizaku said, so that's his choice. Of course, he knew it. They wouldn't have made the same decisions. Of course. He began to concentrate energy in his body and said, Shoo, he can't save him. At that moment, a huge number of monsters appeared behind him, and Eva, holding her sword out in front of him, stood before the protagonist and shouted, Shoo, get back. The next second, Zenikourus reached out to the barrier and shouted, Master! Shizaku said, thanks to the elixir, his mana and stamina had been fully restored. What happens now will prove who is right. At that moment, the coffin behind him opened slightly, and the protagonist, using his ability, thought, Shizaku's level is over 300, almost 100 levels higher than him. No one but him can remove the dwarf's barrier. What can he do? At that moment, a girl emerged from the coffin and said, Darling. The others turned sharply, looking at her, then she smiled, and Shizaku asked anxiously, Remy? He ran up to her and, grabbing her by the shoulders, asked, Remy, does she recognize him? So his elixir worked? He just had to wait. At that moment, MC used his ability and, holding his hand forward, shouted, Shizaku, he must get away from her. This is not his wife. The next second, she plunged her hand into Shizaku's chest, piercing it right through, and then he fell to the ground, calling her name. The others looked on in horror. At that moment, a system window appeared behind the girl, stating, S-rank Undead Queen, SS Magic, A-level Physical Strength, Body Mastery Skills, Temporary Death, Body Possession, and Spirit Form. The next second, the barrier collapsed and Eva screamed, Dwarf Barrier. At that moment, Shizaku lay on the floor in his own bodily fluid, and the Undead Queen exclaimed, to think he came here for such a trivial matter as reviving this woman. Human stupidity truly knows no bounds. At that moment, the protagonist ran forward and, holding his hand out, shouted, Shizaku. Then Soiran shouted, he must wait. Shu. When did he and Shizaku start fighting? He promised to teleport them in 5 minutes if anything went wrong. Eva shouted, it's not Shu. Then the MC raised his hand and said he apologized. He thought he hadn't considered that one of his zombies could prevent him from teleporting them, that it was his mistake for underestimating him and thinking Zenikoura's teleportation was unmatched. Then he said, the boss has taken possession of the body Shizaku was carrying in the coffin. Thus, she weakened his defense and stabbed him in the chest. But it was still true that they had started fighting, and even if they retreated, they should save him. Then the man put his hand to his chest and shouted, Shu, he no longer has the right to command. Leia added, all of them, the guild masters, had come to this conclusion together. At that moment, the protagonist clenched his fist and said that this monster could possess people. He was sure it would attack them again if they didn't let Shizaku die, and the monster would possess him. The next second, Senguji threw off his cape and said, I see. Indeed, that would be troublesome. He held his sword in front of him, and 7 Red changed his form. The next second, Senguji appeared behind the undead queen and delivered a powerful blow, but she quickly jumped aside, and from such a powerful blow, huge chunks of the ceiling fell down. At that moment, 7 Red, holding Shuzaku's body over his shoulder, said, "Okay, we need to get out of here while we can." Then So Iran waved her hand at the protagonist and said that this will have to end. The next second, MC shouted, "Zenikuras, he must carry everyone to safety." The next second, a huge number of undead emerged from the ground and stood behind the undead queen. After a while, Shuzaku lay on the ground. Gurren crouched next to Zenikuras and said, "Teleporting so many people consumes a huge amount of mana. He is out of action for a while. The protagonist is certain the boss is pursuing them and will be here in a few minutes. Before then, they need to do something about Shuzaku." Then he called So Iran and asked if she could heal him with her skills. She placed her hand on his waist and extended her other hand forward, saying that his heart was torn and she couldn't do anything about such a terrible wound. And even if she could, she wouldn't. The Underground City and the East Asian Association had always planned to kill this man. At that moment, the protagonist looked at her and shouted in surprise. "What?" she asked. Did he think they would arrest him and lock him up somewhere? Did he have any idea how much it would cost to create conditions where his manipulator skills wouldn't work? And what would they gain by leaving such a dangerous man alive? He replied, "He might be the strongest in the world right now. His death would be a loss." She leaned towards him and said, "They're only here because he used his power against humanity. Doesn't he really understand?" MC was about to protest, and then he heard Shuzaku call out to him. He turned around abruptly, calling out to him, and Shuzaku said he should just cremate him. That way she wouldn't get his body. He shouted in surprise. "What?" he added. He's not resisting, so he's asking them to let him talk to Shu alone. So Iran firmly declared, "No, they don't have time for that. They can't afford to risk it now." She took out her staff and said that she would burn Shuzaku and all his monsters now, so that creature wouldn't be able to use it. The protagonist stood in front of her and shouted, "So Iran, he's begging, he's pleading." And she, holding a staff emitting powerful energy, said, "Out of the way, Shu." She was sure he understood they weren't in a position to be left alone. The next second, Shizuka released several pulses of energy near Soiran and apologized, but she owed him. 7 Red spoke, as did the purple mist. Riguro slung his sword over his shoulder, and smiling said, "The purpose of a samurai is to fulfill the wishes of his lord." MC looked at them in surprise and said, "Guys," and Senguji slung his sword over his shoulder, approached him, and asked, "Does he know that the art of analysis will be indebted to the Thousand Swords Bowl? He understands. He doesn't want to have any regrets. If they don't have time, then they'll just win a little." So Iran frowned and said, "God, he really has a lot of allies." Then she raised her hand and said, 5 minutes. She will agree to only this and will burn Shuzaku the moment he tries to pull anything." She passed by the protagonist and, turning slightly, added, "Just 5 minutes, okay?" Then the protagonist sat down next to Shuzaku. They called each other, and he said that he needed to ask him for something. The protagonist asked if he wanted to ask him something. He answered, "That girl he saved, who exactly is she to him? Is she more important to him than Remy, who is plunged into eternal sleep? He means that for her sake he went into the dungeon, without caring for his own safety." He answered that Eva is a precious member of his guild. Shuzaku asked if someone else was on the verge of death. Would he give them the elixir? The protagonist answered negatively. He thinks he would give it to anyone, but he will obtain the elixir on his own. He is sure of it. He is obliged. And also, he clenched his fist and, frowning, added that if he sacrificed anyone to save Remy, they would never be able to laugh together again. Then Shuzaku said that he knew. He hadn't changed at all. With these words, he smiled, then extended a trembling hand to the protagonist and said, "Shu, please. His wife Remy, he must return her body. He wants her to at least rest in peace." The protagonist began to cry and replied, "Okay, he promises." He took his trembling hand, and then Shuzaku pulled it towards himself and whispered something in his ear. The next second, his eyes began to close. So Iran ran forward, and pushing the protagonist aside, shouted, "Get out of the way." She directed a stream of fire at Shuzaku's body, then turned around and said, "Shu, he must give the command to retreat. If we consider only the result, the mission was a success. After all, their goal was to kill Shuzaku. Everyone except him knew this." After a while, So Iran stepped forward and said that he had more power than they initially thought, so she ignored his actions. But she still believed she shouldn't have let him convince her. It was only by luck that they escaped unharmed. Monsters aren't the only enemies adventurers face. Something like this could happen again. When that happens, she'll kill the bastard, no matter who it is. Anyone who hurts their own must be eliminated. She's sure all the guild masters would say the same. After that, MC walked out the door, and Eva approached him and said they'd done a good job today. She smiled, looking at him, and then they walked forward and she asked, "Shu, are you sure everything's all right? That he used an elixir on her?" He looked at her and asked if she was going to lecture him too. She replied that it was just a question. Then he looked down and said he was just really scared he'd lose her. She looked at him in surprise, then looked down and smiled. Then she looked up at him happily and said, "Hey, Shu, in that case she'll work even harder than before, okay? If it turned out he'd wasted the elixir on her, Remy would be mad at them, and she wouldn't want him to feel guilty about anything." He smiled and said, "Okay, then he'll make sure she works herself to the bone, Eva." He'd learned something during this expedition. The S-rank Watatsumi dungeon they needed to clear was huge, and harbored a multitude of incredibly powerful monsters. Now he needed to figure out how to make the guild stronger, not just individual adventurers. And one more thing. He remembered Shuzaku whispering to him, "Shu, there's something I need to tell you. The monsters in the dungeons can evolve when they kill people, so he can't let them or the bosses kill anyone. If he wants to protect his friends." Then he replied, "Okay, Shizaku." 2.5 years later, the dungeon city is completed. May 3rd, 2024. Several adventurers in the building began chatting. The dungeon city built in the ocean is opening up its possibilities. It was incredible. They actually built a huge city in just 2 years. And they were still building it? You heard that only guilds of A rank and above are allowed here. Perhaps it won't be long before it's open to everyone. At that moment, the protagonist stood next to them and thought that the clearing of the Watatsumi dungeon would begin in earnest right now. He was powerless. He acted on his own, and because of it, he almost lost a friend and couldn't save Shizaku. He recalled his last request. His wife, Remy, asking him to return her body. He thought he still couldn't do it. After a while, Soiran stepped forward. She took the stage and announced that she had assumed the position of head of the Underground Cities Division. Her name was Soiran. She will do everything in her power to avoid disgracing the guild masters, the representatives of the alliance who elected her, and she will dedicate herself entirely to clearing Watatsumi. At that moment, several adventurers looked at the protagonist and started muttering, "Hey, he should watch. Isn't this Shu from the Art of Analysis? Wow, he hasn't posted a single video in the past 2 years. Yeah, maybe this is self-punishment for the Shuzaku incident?" Whatever the case, he didn't think his guild would be invited here. He was very famous, he helped many people, but that's in the past. His comrade added that he'd probably already spent all the money he made from the video. How unfair. They should be working hard just to keep the guild here, and he just showed up. The next second, they cried out in surprise when Seven Red placed his hands on their shoulders. One of them shouted in surprise, "Seven Red." He smiled, looking at them, and said, "The fact that they were here means they were A-rank adventurers like him, right? Are any of them guild masters?" He didn't think so. He remembered all the guild masters who had done something significant. Did they know there were requirements to reach a certain level to stay in the dungeon city? They must be good. Complaining about another guild master. Would they mind if they had the same quota as him? The adventurer asked him to forgive them. Seven Red. He sighed and waving his hand, said that if they had time for gossip, they should go level up. He replied that they apologized. Then they scattered in different directions. After that, Seven Red looked at the protagonist and said, "It seems he hasn't logged out yet, Appraiser." 2 years ago, Riguro drew his sword from its sheath and delivered a powerful blow, cutting through several trees in front of him. He chanted, "1, 2, 3, enough. You must have been too eager to address him, my lord." Then he turned, looking at the protagonist, and smiling asked, "So what brings him here? If he needs him, he can go on an expedition anytime." MC lowered his gaze and said, "Riguro, he has a request. He asks for training. His stats may be lower than Seven Red, an A-rank adventurer, but his combat ability is on par. This proves he's the strongest swordsman, so he's asking. He wants to get stronger." Riguro laughed loudly in response, then said, "My lord, he will fulfill his request." Shu was the weakest of them. His skills weren't up to par for combat, and his strength was at a low level. He had a high level, but his strength was weaker than everyone else in that dungeon. That's why. In the present, a huge monster emerged from the ground, and the protagonist, seeing it, used blindness. He suddenly rose into the air and, turning over, noticed sharp appendages from the monster's body flying at him. He thought, "Oh shit." But the next second, Riguro suddenly appeared in front of him and, cutting through all the spikes, delivered a slashing attack to the monster's body. He said it was a feint. When he lost his balance, he launched a long-range attack. Since judging is forbidden, he needs to observe the monsters with blindness and make quick decisions. He wouldn't win this battle. He smiled, looking at the protagonist, and added that next time he won't interfere. The protagonist replied, "Yes, sensei." The skill blindness is the ability to visualize space and predict an opponent's movements based on their body movements, without relying on judgment. Thanks to this, even an appraiser, lacking both strength and mana, can engage in close combat. After a while, Riguro looked down on the protagonist as he charged at the monster and said, "Unexpectedly, he has talent." He stroked his beard and added, "He's much better at making decisions than before. His body can change to reflect that." Then he laughed loudly again. Samurai, some romanticize long-extinct concepts of the past. A little earlier, Riguro had held his sword in front of him and shouted, "What is this man asking for?" Like this man, so was Riguro. He thought only of strength, of becoming stronger. This was his sole aspiration, and he used every means necessary to achieve it. The advent of the dungeon and the adventurer system were a gift from the gods for one who desired to become the strongest. After a while, the protagonist stood beneath the flowing waters of a waterfall and said, "Sensei, what is this training for?" He smiled and asked back, "Really, for what?" MC looked at him in confusion. Riguro put his hands on his waist and said, "But it feels like training, right? He should just imagine if he could get stronger just by dousing himself with cold water. Then he wouldn't have to put in so much effort." Then the protagonist started drying his hair and thought, so he's just taking a day off. After that, Riguro approached him and said, "Hey, my lord." In this world, he'd only admitted defeat to 2 people. MC asked, "Okay, like the giant?" He smiled and said that wasn't true. He'd defeated him. It didn't matter how many times he'd lost, but since he'd defeated him in the last fight, that meant he'd won. The protagonist asked, "But then who?" Riguro looked at him seriously and answered, "Shuzaku." The first time he saw him, he immediately knew he couldn't handle him, no matter what he did. However, while he cowered in fear, the weakest man didn't even flinch. Moreover, he said he wanted to save him. This was his complete loss. The next second, he placed his sword on the ground and said, "To follow the path of the samurai birthright is to seek one's own death. He never thought he would find someone he could call my lord at such a venerable age. Any wish he had, my lord, his sword would grant. The next second, several silhouettes appeared around the protagonist, and Riguro said that they would continue training until his body and mind established a subconscious connection. The protagonist threw a towel over his shoulder and replied, "Okay, sensei." Then he tossed the towel aside. Meanwhile, Senguji was training, his face covered in sweat. He looked at Eva and asked why she had come. On an errand for her boyfriend? She came closer and asked, "So, he has a private training room?" To be honest, it was a bit unexpected. The next second, he looked at the sword in his hand and said he just thought it would be worth training now. It's not like he was doing this for fun. Eva said she knew his sword had a special trick. Since he had displayed the divinity ability she possessed, she had actually come here for him to teach her how to use the divine origin. He looked at her in surprise, then said, since Shu hadn't said anything, he guessed this was unofficial guild business, right? If she wanted to learn how to use divinity, why not ask the all-knowing appraiser? She shouted that it wasn't enough. She thought, his mastery of this skill, he was simply much stronger than her. Then she clenched her fist and said, never again did she want him to sacrifice anything because of her weakness. Senguji looked at her in surprise again. She placed her hand on her chest and said that she asked Senguji, he must teach her, and he replied that he didn't want to. He turned around and, waving his sword, said that he hated troublesome activities. Shu was one thing, but doing it for her wouldn't get him anything. The next second, she used Kazuchi's spirit summon, but Senguji suddenly thrust his sword in front of him, blocking her attack. She frowned and asked, then how about this? They would fight, and whoever loses would fulfill the winner's wish. He replied that it was out of the question, and besides, she read too much manga. She asked if reading manga was quite interesting. Didn't he know? He asked, what was she talking about? She said she wanted to become stronger. He looked at her thoughtfully, and then he turned away and said, okay then. He accepted her terms. She looked at him in surprise, and then he smiled and asked, but is she sure? She knows it will end just like those stories in the Gentleman's Magazine. Shu will be jealous, right? She cried out in embarrassment. What? This is harassment. The next second, Senguji pointed the tip of his sword straight at Eva, and she looked at it in fear. Then she put away her weapon and said that he had won. She knelt down and thought that his victory was not justified by a surprise attack. She simply failed to notice his lunge. He really was strong. Then he slung the sword over his shoulder and said, so she must fulfill his wish. What should he ask for? Oh, he knows. She must become his apprentice. She looked up at him in surprise, and he added that he was not interested in such brats, so if she wanted to, she should come when she was older. She cried out, no. He said that he just thought it would be a good chance for Shu to be in his debt. And also, it's not like he hates manga. Currently, the guild union headquarters is in the dungeon city. The guild worker smiled and asked, they were Akito and Yachiro, right? How could she help them? Akito smiled and said they wanted permission to enter Watatsumi. She replied, 2 B-rank adventurers. Oh my, they've almost reached A rank. They've achieved this despite their young age. Akito smiled awkwardly, scratched the back of his head, and said, oh come on, they may be young, but they're actually trained in the art of analysis and have participated in battles. Yachiro sighed and told him not to get carried away. The worker added that their qualifications were sufficient for entering the first floor of the dungeon, but you never knew what might happen. She asked them to be careful. After a while, they found themselves on the first floor, and Akito, looking ahead, asked if this was where they planned to meet. Yachiro raised her index finger and said, she thinks so. There they are. That's the Zenikuru's teleporter. Akito looked ahead and said, anyway, you never know what's on the guildmaster's mind. Yachiro held her hair back from the strong wind and said that today he seemed a bit mysterious. She wants to say what the reason should be. She looked in surprise at Thomas, who appeared and asked, bringing a level 5 adventurer to an S-rank dungeon? Not long before, in the protagonist's office, Akito asked, newbie? The MC sitting at the table said, yeah, he recently found him. He wants to take him to the first floor of Watatsumi. Yachiro asked, what kind of person is he? The protagonist answered, he's a fisherman. In the present, Zenokura smiled and thanked them for their cooperation. He's a spirit serving his dear client, Shu. They shouldn't worry guys, he'll protect them. Yachiro said, the guildmaster didn't tell them the details. Then Akito looked at Thomas and thoughtfully asked, what was he thinking? Taking a child to a dungeon? Then Zenokura took out a case and asked, who knows, but he entrusted it to him. Akito extended his hand forward and asked, case? At that moment, Thomas approached them and said it was his. He snatched the case from Zenokura's hands and placed it on the sand, and Akito was indignant. Hey, what's wrong with it? After that, Thomas opened the case, and Akito was surprised. A fishing rod? Yachiro said, wow, it's filled with mana, and the line is made of mithril. Akito looked at her and said, so he really is a fisherman. The next second, Thomas had already equipped the fishing rod and cast it into the water. Akito looked at him and asked, fishing in a dungeon? Hey, what is he trying to catch here? Not noticing a reaction, he became indignant. He dares to ignore him. Yachiro smiled, called out to him as a comrade, and then suggested they focus on their work, okay? The guildmaster wasn't the type to force them to do something without a reason. Then she raised her staff and cast a barrier spell, Koenarite. She said that monsters lower than A rank wouldn't bother them now. Now they just need to wait a bit. The next second, Thomas swung his fishing rod, and Akito looked at him and asked, have you caught one yet? Yachiro was surprised that he had. After that, Akito held a fish in his hand and asked, "What the hell?" Thomas replied, "A fish. Was he really that stupid?" He looked at him indignantly, then said, "He should listen, newbie. He should respect his elders." Thomas replied that Shu told him that there was no hierarchy in this guild. Everyone was equal. Doesn't that mean they have equal status? At that moment, Yachiiro patted Akito on the shoulder and told him to calm down. He sighed and said, "It's not like he's trying to bully you." After that, he introduced himself and, sitting down next to Thomas, asked his name. He introduced himself in return, and then Yachiiro came up to them and, introducing herself as well, said that she was pleased to meet Thomas. They were ordered to protect him, so they should get along. He cast his fishing rod and said that he was also glad to meet him. After that, he asked, "She was crazy, huh?" He suddenly showed up at his house to recruit his older sister for the guild union. Akito thought in surprise, "Wait, so it was his sister?" He added. He bowed his head to a poor kid like him and begged him to join the guild. At that moment, Akito laughed and said, "Yeah, you never know what's going on in his mind. Anyway, he's incredible. I mean, even if he loses, he never makes a mistake, you know?" A month later, Akito sighed desperately, sitting on the beach, and said, "Fishing day after day. They have a lot of huge fish, but what's the point of it?" At that moment, Zenikuris, sunbathing on a lounger, put his hands behind his head and said, "Well, Akito, he should just think of it as a vacation." He replied that he was too adaptable. The next second, Thomas's body glowed, and he said he leveled up again. The system window in front of him said, "Thomas, 11 years old, class, fisherman, level 30, mana, 310, physical strength, 310, skills, fishing level 7, guide level 5, storage level 3, luck level 1. The next second, he was pulled into the sea, and he shouted, "Akito, he has to help." He grabbed the fishing rod and shouted that he was coming. Their hands shook with tension, and then they clenched their teeth and pulled a huge turtle to the surface. Akito asked in surprise, "What the hell?" She was holding the burnt skull tightly in her hands. The boss of the third floor's monsters, Watatsumi, is the queen of the undead. 2 years ago, she was far more powerful than their expedition. But now she has the bosses of the first 2 floors, which Shuzaku defeated under her command. Furthermore, he can only think of one thing. They cremated Shuzaku in the dungeon, but his bones and ashes remain there. While the queen of the undead is unable to possess him due to his lack of power, perhaps she can glean some of his ability from his remains. At that moment, the protagonist placed his hand on the glass and thought that they couldn't face the third floor with humanity's current strength. And ranked adventurers of level 90 and above recently established an S rank for adventurers of even higher levels. Including them, only 7 S rank adventurers are recognized in the world. 5 of them belong to the same guild, but they refuse to cooperate with the Dungeon City on this matter. He wonders how the world's strongest guild came to be made up of only strong adventurers, and whether they are enemies or allies, he needs to find out. In the present, the boys looked at the creature in surprise and said, "Wow." Akito jumped sharply to the side, grabbing Thomas by the arm, and then looked at the creature and asked, "What is this?" Thomas replied, "It's a sea turtle." Akito put his hands on its waist and said, "No, he means it's too big." Then Yachiiro asked, "So, the master's plan was to capture this?" At that moment, Zenikuris looked at the turtle and asked, "What now? Should he report this to his dear client Shu?" He thought it was time to go back. Then Akito threw on his windbreaker and said that in that case, he'd check out this monster. It looks like it's obedient. After that, he climbed to the very top of the shell, noticing a huge crystal in the center, and asked, "What is this? A precious stone?" With these words, he placed his hand on the crystal, and the next second disappeared, screaming loudly. Yachiiro called out to him in fear and shouted, "Zenikuris, what happened there?" He answered, "Right now." He climbed up to the turtle's shell and said that there was no one here. Yachiiro said in fear, "We need to find him. He must report to the master and contact headquarters." At that moment, Thomas approached her and told her to calm down. He was back. The next second, Akito appeared on the turtle's shell and sighing said, "He's back." Yachiiro screamed indignantly, "He's an idiot." He apologized to her and then jumped onto the sand, and Thomas asked what happened. He answered, "It seems the stone on the shell is some kind of teleporter. When he touched it, he woke up in a place similar to a temple. There was a similar stone inside, and when he touched it, he returned. He thinks he needs to report this to the guildmaster." Yachiiro asked, "Zenikuris, can you teleport them along with the turtle?" The next second, she felt a powerful energy, and turning around shouted, "No." Akito asked, "What's wrong?" She replied that her barrier had been broken with one blow. He was surprised. With one blow, there were no monsters on this floor that could easily break her barrier. Zenikuris said, "In other words, there's only one option. It wasn't a monster that broke the barrier." At that moment, Roland Moro approached them, put his hand on his waist, and said, "I see, just a couple of small fish." The next second, Akito held his sword in front of him and asked, "What do you want?" He came closer and said they could go. He wasn't interested in them. What he wanted was the kid and that turtle. He smiled and asked, "Did he think they'd leave after hearing that?" He replied, "Yeah." The next second, he rushed past Akito, and he turned around in surprise and shouted, "What?" Rollins pointed his hand at Thomas, and Yachiiro, channeling energy at him, shouted, "Reinforced barrier, Sonorith." But Rollins easily pierced the barrier covering Thomas, and Yachiiro was surprised. "What?" He even broke the reinforced barrier with one blow. The next second, Akito shouted, "Fire sword." Holding the weapon ablaze with fire, he thought it was a sword made of magic stone, created specifically for him to maximize his fire ability. By combining the fire sword with the magic stones of his fire monsters, he was capable of unbelievably powerful attacks. The next second, he unleashed an attack called Burning Phoenix, but Rollins waved his hand, dispelling it, and said, "Warm." The others looked at him in confusion, and Akito shouted, "What?" Then Yachiiro turned to Zenikuris and shouted, he should teleport them away right now. He replied that he didn't think it would work. He'd set up a nasty barrier. Roland smiled and said, Exactly. He didn't plan on letting them go. The art of analysis. Akito frowned and thought. He attacked them knowing which guild they belonged to. Does that mean he'd been watching them all this time? He then said, if he knows who they are, then he knows about their guildmaster's assessment. He really thinks he can do this and hide from him? Roland smirked and laughed, asking, so what? Was he trying to intimidate him? He needs to listen, kid. The only ones who will rule this world are his guild and him. So he needs to shut up, you weakling. The next second, he clenched his fist and used his slave level. The next second, Akito dropped the sword from his hands and looked ahead in surprise, then collapsed exhausted to the ground, thinking, what the hell? He can't move. At that moment, Rollins, smiling, looked at him and said, considering their level difference, his slave level is hindering his goal of achieving anything. He believes he's level 70 higher than him. He can't do anything, right? At that moment, Yachiiro called out to him in alarm, and Rollins told her to stay back. Akito then told Zenikuris that he'll buy them some time. He thought that since he hadn't used this skill, it must be a limitation. He thinks he can only use it on one person. Zenikuris then said that he believes they only have one option. Rollins came closer and said, it's useless. With their low levels, there's no way they can break his barrier, so they won't be able to use their vaunted teleport. Didn't he tell them? They can't escape him. The next second, Akito unleashed a powerful stream of fire at Rollins, shouting that he wouldn't let him. He thought, a fire strike. It was a fusion of his fire cloak and burning phoenix skills. This skill propels his body forward. He ended up right next to Rollins, but he thrust his fist in front of him, blocking his attack, and said, so slow and so damn stupid. Annoying. The next second, he punched Akito in the chest, sending him flying back, spitting out a few drops of blood. Rollins then waved his hand and said, that hurt. After that, he turned around and asked, where did they go? The barrier is in place, so where did they go? At that moment, Akito laughed and said, okay, it's funny. So what matters is that he didn't defeat him. This is his victory, weakling. The next second, Rollins enraged screamed, he must die, pathetic worm. He raised his fist to strike, but the next second, the protagonist blocked his fist with his sword. Akito, sitting up, asked in surprise, Guildmaster? At that moment, everyone else was on the turtle's shell. Yachiiro shouted, Akito. He said, Guildmaster. He's changing, he. Before he could finish, the protagonist crouched down next to him and thanked him. Everyone is safe thanks to him. At that moment, Roland said, moron of the art of analysis. How did he get here? Before he could finish, the protagonist turned around and indignantly asked, hey, what did he do to his subordinates? Shortly before, Zenikuris shouted in alarm, Master, they're in big trouble. Yachiiro added, Master, Akito, he. Before she could finish, MC approached them and said he knew. He'd seen it with his skill. He figured his barrier hadn't affected the turtle's teleport. Most likely, the barrier was just a dome, so it wouldn't interfere with teleportation to the temple at the bottom of the sea. Then Zenikuris could teleport them upward diagonally, avoiding the barrier, and return them by passing through the temple's teleport again. Then he said, they must go save Akito. It's time to transform into your full form, Zenikuris. He transformed into his human form and answered, as you wish, master. At that moment, the protagonist thought, monsters aren't the adventurer's only enemies, and he won't hesitate if anyone stands in his way. They must eliminate anything that could harm his allies. In the present, Yachiiro anxiously called out to her comrade, running up to him with tears in her eyes, shouting that she would heal him now. Then Thomas approached them and told Akito he was grateful. He smiled and said, it's nothing. He's his senpai after all. Then Rollins walked forward and said, can they please stop this touching reunion thing? He had no idea what kind of trick he used to get through the barrier. It must be tough being a guildmaster. After all, he has to clean up after his little brats. MC asked, are those really the kind of words a knight should say? Wagging his tail at his master. Akito was much stronger than him. Rollins smirked in response, looking at him, and the protagonist said, Rollins, one of the 7 S-ranked world seekers, what are you trying to achieve? He shouted in irritation, hey, you dreadful weakling appraiser. The next second, he raised his fist to strike, but the protagonist stopped it again with his sword and said, what a weak attack, Rollins. He looked at him, then jumped back and thought, did he block his attack? No, it must have been an accident. Then he swung his fist again and thought, now he will make a feint. But the next second, MC easily dodged, then again. At that moment, Akito, watching what was happening, put his hand to his head and said, unbelievable, what amazing moves. Zenikuris added, master is amazing. He said he seemed to know his opponent's next move. At that moment, the protagonist continued the fight. He thought that precognition allows him to see the future and its goals. With clairvoyance, he knows how every bone and tendon moves. A bird's eye view of the battle gives him a bird's eye view. And finally, evaluation allows him to know every detail his opponent is capable of. The next second, he punched Rollins in the face, causing him to fall to the sand. He asked why he didn't use his sword. MC replied that he could have killed him that way. The next second, Rollins rose to his feet and pointing his hand forward, ran at the protagonist, shouting, idiot. But he said what he was saying. He saw everything. He kicked him, knocking him back, and said that he leveled up thanks to something from outside. Then he looked at the system window, which said, Rollins, Class Knight, Level, Real 77 and Improved 154. Physical Strength, 1,840 out of 3,380. Mana, 3,580 out of 8,200. Skills, Chivalry level 31, Steel Heart level 29, Fury Release level 27, Strike level 25, Lightning Strike level 23, Rock Break level 21, Knight of Fury level 19, Soul of Fire level 18, Condition, Rank Link. After that, the protagonist said, now he must answer him, Rollins, who raised his level. A little earlier, Rollins' guildmates said that they wanted him to leave the team. The guy put his hand forward and said that it would be better for him, Rollins. He used his night class as their vanguard, but he always loses in the end because he is too overzealous, right? He knew this would happen. The guys said they no longer needed Roland's protection. Everyone agreed they'd had to heal him so many times today. A fortune was being spent on his treatment. If the cost kept rising, they'd have to ask him to leave. Protecting his comrades was his pride and joy. He wasn't afraid of being hurt, he was. At one point, they said they wanted him to leave the team. He'd done everything right. He only wanted one thing. He was simply too weak. After a while, he was drowning his sorrows, and then the guy hiding behind the hood approached him and said, "It's not true. He's strong, Rollins. But to drown in shame, never knowing the taste of victory, with nothing to die for, is that how he wants his life to be? He's sure that's not true. Is he right? He guarantees him strength. Soon he'll know the sweet taste of blood, something only winners know." After a while, his level rose and he struck the guy in front of him. His former comrades screamed, "Impossible, he's a tank. Isn't this class only good at defense? How could he become so strong?" Then the mysterious man said that he could become stronger than anyone, Rollins. He should join him. If he went with him, no one would dare underestimate him again. After all, might is right. In the present, the protagonist asked, "Will he answer him, Rollins? Who leveled him up?" He replied that he hadn't lost yet. At that moment, he opened his hand, revealing a storage ring in the palm of his hand. MC thought it allowed him to store and retrieve an item of a certain size. The next second, Rollins stood up, holding a sword and shield. He said he had done everything correctly. The protagonist used his ability and said that it was wrong. He was mistaken. He blocked Roland's attack and he shouted that he had become strong. He shamed those who abandoned him and called him useless. Might is right. The protagonist replied that this wasn't true. His power was meant to protect people. With proper training, a knight was one of the strongest classes, but he'd used it on the wrong person. With that, he cut through his opponent's sword, and Roland sank to his knees in despair. Afterward, the MC said, "Everyone's done well. It's time to return to the guild." A short while later, in the office, a subordinate told him Rollins had been arrested by the Dungeon City Police, but he hadn't revealed anything during interrogation. His guild, Church of St. Lint, denied any involvement, but even so, they would be held accountable and fined. The protagonist asked thoughtfully, "So there's no way to know whether he acted on his own or on the guild's orders?" She added, "Besides, they'll have a meeting with Church of St. Lint in a few days." The protagonist placed his hands on the table and thought. They were the only S-rank guild in the world, and they had rejected all requests for cooperation from the Dungeon City, and nothing was known about them. Would he really be able to meet their guildmaster? At that moment, his subordinate asked, "By the way, hasn't he updated his level at the guild headquarters in quite some time?" His colleague smiled and asked if he had probably increased significantly. She is sure that he is now above level 300. He laughed and remarked that she was exaggerating. The highest level was 238, belonging to someone from the Church of St. Lint. At that moment, MC called up his status, and looking at the system window that appeared, said in surprise that he was already at level 428.